Good evening and welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting for October 16th, 2023. For anyone in the audience who wants to follow along with us tonight, we have agendas out in the hallway to door to the left, and if you turn to the right, there's also blue slips out there for anyone who wants to follow along. Anyone, I guess they aren't watching at home tonight, are they?
Yes.
They are,
They
okay.
can be, but they may see some intermittent activity
Okay.
due to the issues with the internet.
Okay, just so they know that there may be some issues. For you at home, if you want to follow along, you can go to our website, which is livoniapublicschools.org. You can highlight over the board tab, and you will see board information. If you tap on that, you'll be able to find our agendas. As I indicated, this is a committee of the whole meeting, and if you're really looking to get into the nitty-gritty and the details of items that are going to come before the board for a vote at our next meeting, this is a meeting that you want to tune into. The items that are going to be brought before us tonight have probably been discussed at least at the study session, which would have been last week, but this is where we really delve into those issues. One of the other things that we always like to emphasize is our community with character. And one of the traits there that we really feel is important is respect. And you will see that amongst the board. As I always say, we don't always agree on things, but we respect each other, we listen to each other, and we come to a consensus. That's one of the reasons why if you tune into a regular board meeting, you don't see a lot of discussion on the items because we've already hashed those out here. And we do respect each other, and anyone who comes before the board, we tell them that we will respect you, and we, in return, ask for your respect, not only to the board, but to our superintendent and to our cabinet. We find that that is the best way to teach our children those traits, and that's by doing it ourselves, and that's the best example. So with that, we'll move on to item 1, which is our audience communication. I do not have any blue slips. I don't see anybody rushing to the podium. So we'll move on to item 2, Committee of the Whole. There are no items listed tonight. Is there anything additional, Mrs. Oquist?
President Johnson, the only thing I would say is to reiterate what you mentioned at the beginning, that if someone is watching on YouTube and they see some intermittent disruption, we are having some internet issues as far as connectivity, and so I rest assured that the full meeting will be uploaded tomorrow in its entirety, but you may see some gaps in coverage this evening.
Thank you. So then we'll move on to item 3, our building and site, and I will turn that over to Mrs. Burton.
Thank you. Get a microphone up here. Thank you. The first item on our agenda this evening is item 3A, bid results of Franklin and Cleveland Roofing, and I will turn it over to Mr. Francis.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
We have Mr. Brian Weber from Plant Moran Real Point joining me this evening.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, Brian. Good evening, Brian.
As the board is aware, we mentioned this at the study session last week, and as probably most community members are aware, we've been doing roofs each summer for several years in a row now. Just finished Franklin's and I suddenly blanked. Hey, Stevenson and Cleveland. I've already got next year when I say Franklin going in my mind. So we're bringing. It wasn't Cleveland. Kennedy. I am throwing it off. Wow. I apologize. Hope your internet is down.
I think it captured that one.
Is this on? Sorry. In the letter that I have in the board packet, I do mention that we had taken out to bid for the summer of '24 to do Cleveland and Franklin's roofs. Those are bid upon individually, and that's why we also will be discussing 2 different recommendations for award from two different companies. On the bright side of things, we are seeing the price per square foot on the roofing coming down from its peaks during COVID. It's starting to inch its way back down into a more reasonable space. So if you take a look in the packet, we have Mr. Weber put together the sinking fund roofing replacement projections and a cost summary. You can see that what we had budgeted for was more than, so they came in well under what we had budgeted because we've been working with higher per square foot numbers over the past few years. It's been starting to come on down. What was our peak, do you figure, when we, during the highest points?
We were up to $40 a square foot at one point when we were in the process. Some of the projects we had to take bids that these came in around $17, $18 a square foot, which is going back down to the
quite a difference.
2019 timeframe, somewhere around that. So we're normalizing again in this front. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So again, Mr. Weber, you said that is, just to make sure I heard this right, the 17 ballpark is where we were prior to the pandemic?
Prior to pandemic, yes.
Okay, good.
Approaching those prices, yes.
Okay, terrific, thank
Yes.
you.
So we did have quite a bit of coverage, which was nice to see. And you, if you look through the pages, I think it's page 8 in our packet, you can see we had 7 different companies come in and lay bids onto these 2 projects at Cleveland and Franklin. And just a quick side note, we have been getting through many of the roofs, and it's really been, I think, a well-planned project. As you know, we have RTA, Roofing Technology Associates, that are doing the design. They're basically the architect, and they do the management as the actual project occurs during the summer to ensure that the work that's getting done is adhering to the plan and that, work is being done appropriately, as well as buttoning up a building if there's weather coming, et cetera, having all those things done appropriately. And we've talked internally about how we have been happy with asking RTA to design sort of in advance so we have options, because what will occur is we have a plan, but then we start to learn there are more work orders at a certain building, and we say, boy, we're gonna bring them forward and not have to worry about, well, we've said we were gonna do this order, we have to stick to that order. So it's really been going quite well. And Stevenson, which just got done in the summer of '23, that was an important job, because as you know, it's obviously a very large building, but it also was getting a lot of work orders. So we had quite a few leaks over at Stevenson, and it was just in time to get that roof replaced over there. So I think we've been having some good success, and it feels very good to be able to come to the board and to the community and say that the pricing looks like it's coming back down to earth based upon what we're seeing recently. So getting into this bid tab, we have at the 2 buildings, 2 separate recommendations for you. So we have an apparent low bidder. So from the dollar amount purely, we had a low bidder at Cleveland Elementary. However, we are going to be recommending what is, as the low responsible bidder, the second lowest number. So we had a firm that came in at $1,095,000, and we are, however, going to recommend Royal Roofing at $1,351,400. While that amount is higher, two reasons. One, the firm that had the apparent low bid is a firm that we have not used in the past, and we have reports from RTA that they've had some of their work in the past, and just too small of a firm for a large job and the timetable that we're asking for. We weren't confident in and this is going to hold true for the Franklin job as well, and a different firm. We have confidence in Royal. They've been in the district repeatedly. They're familiar with our process. They have proven over and over again that they have the manpower, they understand the schedule, they know that we have that summer time, and that is all we truly have before staff and students return. So, do you want to add anything before we
Yeah, I can
move
add to
forward?
it. Not only with RTA, we reached out internally at Cressa. Obviously do a lot of districts in the area. There was also concerns on other districts with this firm. So with that given, there was ongoing issues they're working through that. Cleveland is a different animal than anything we've replaced in the district right now. If you guys have seen the building, we call it a sawtooth. It's up and down jagged roof system, not a flat roof system. Given that it's a unique system, it's going to take special work up there. Like Phil had said, Royal has proven themselves out here, and with the concerns with the other company at other districts, we felt it was safest to award to Royal. And another one was the amount of staff hours in their proposal. Royal was aligning with the other bidders. Our low bid had significantly less amount of man-hours in the job as well, so we had a concern there as well. So it's just one of those, it's not a typical flat roof, small elementary school. It's gonna be a challenge and a different project than we've seen before. So knowing Royal has performed, that's why our recommendation that way.
Okay.
Yep. So just to summarize, Royal Roofing is our recommendation for the lowest responsible bidder. And we've had success with Royal, and we have confidence in Royal. And knowing that we came in far under budget because we had allotted the dollars towards these projects, we feel very, very comfortable, because in our estimation, and I would hope the board would agree, getting the job done right is the most important thing. We have to have confidence in that. Which brings us to Franklin High School. The apparent low bidder was really quite close at $2,869,411 to the Lutz Roofing, who will be the recommendation from our team at $2,895,000. So very, very tight numbers there. Again, similarly with the low apparent bidder, we had concerns over scheduling, manpower, and just kind of overall ability to accomplish such a large task as Franklin High School. When we've had recommending Lutz as low responsible bidder, they have had success in the district. Did you want to add anything on that one?
No, that's about the same. There was concern on overall size of company, and if it was a smaller job, we were taking different considerations. But once again, Lutz has proved on larger buildings like this that they were able to, even Stevenson, they were able to complete on time. So we actually had 3 bids within $35,000 on this, so we know our pricing's right. It was good coverage, and we feel confident that with the decision.
Yeah, I think that's an important element of that, is that they were not only outstanding bid coverage, but they were also relatively tight at the top. And so I think overall, certainly the board policy does call for the lowest responsible bidder. And I think that again shows the depth and breadth of the questions that are asked, the interviews that are done, the study of the bid tab results, that the recommendations that come to you have really been vetted through. And in this case, the lower responsible bidder really are the best recommendations to move forward.
And this is why we have a team of folks. It's not just LPS. It's not just Plant Moran, Real Point. It's not just RTA. Everybody can then draw on each other to say, have you worked with them? Brian, can you reach out to folks who work with other school districts or other companies with these companies, et cetera, et cetera. So we try to get a well-rounded 360-degree view.
Questions or comments? Mrs. Bonnefield?
So for Cleveland, there's that kind of one outlier on the high end, and then on Franklin, there's a couple outliers, and it's not consistent across the board as to, like, in the order that these guys bid on it, and that, you know, that the super high bids are not consistent between both schools. Do we know what the program was and why? I mean, because some of these bids are double and triple what?
We see this spread a lot right now when we come to the table for the other bond projects as well. We get a very large spread on it. As far as the spread between the two schools, the only thing I attribute to is Cleveland, like I said, is just a different system. It's going to be a trial and error to start. We've talked in our post-bid interviews, talked to all the firms, talking through the process, because it's not a typical roof. And whether those firms had to put additional manpower to it or assumed higher labor rates to get the roof removed and installed back in, just because it's a different system, could be a key player in that one.
Okay.
Other questions or comments on this item? All right. Can we put this on the agenda for a vote on?
23rd?
Thank you.
I apologize. Just to clarify, we're also asking for, as typical, a 6% contingency on top of it. So along with those two numbers, and then you can see the total at the bottom on third page in the packet. The full recommendation is $4,246,400 for the two contractors, and then we're asking for a 6% contingency of $254,800 for a total recommendation of $4,501,200.
That'll be in the board motion, including the contingency, but as you can see, the variance is a delta to the good of almost $836,000 from what we had budgeted originally, even with contingency.
And along that line, I assume that's going to go back into our bond budget because other items are certainly coming in higher than
This
we
is
would have
sinking
liked.
fund.
It's a sinking
Oh,
fund.
sinking fund, I'm
Yes.
sorry. Okay,
But on that note, the
Same-
good news is,
same.
yes, we did return, I believe, well over $200,000 in the contingency from last summer's roofing project. It was minimal changes again, so the good news there is we can put that right back into the pot and it
okay,
goes back
so
in.
it's going, and that is right back in the contingency.
But we
Correct.
continue with contingency because you never know. We don't want to say, well, gee, we've been returning a lot of the contingency each summer. That one summer that you don't have it, and especially with Cleveland being a unique roof, we want to continue keeping and carrying a contingency in the summer. We're more than happy to, when we come back and say, the vast majority of it has gone back into the sinking fund.
Terrific.
Brian, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
We know, if we look at the drawing, the RTA heat drawing for Franklin, is the area that is the hatch mark, with the hash marks, is that the area that is being completed this
Yes, good
summer?
point. Yes, it is, for Franklin High School, it is not, similar to Stevenson last year, is not a full building replacement. The area in the map, it is the last page in the packet, is the area to be replaced. And then if the question comes up, there are other areas that are red on there. We have to manage this from a square foot standpoint per summer of what a crew can replace in one summer. That's talking with Mr. Lau's team, Mr. Roberts, understanding where the nuisance points are. So the area we chose are over the classrooms. And then areas to the north will be addressed in a later summer. It's just that we got to make sure we don't bite off more than we can chew in one summer.
So the slash marks indicate the work that's being done this summer?
Correct.
Yes.
That's in this
Color is
package
the
in this.
same.
Correct.
Yes. Right, and some other-
And
okay.
there's a bold black around it, and that's really the majority of those classrooms is that we're attacking on this project.
Yep. And then the previous map, Cleveland is a full replacement for the full building.
And the slash marks here, the horizontal mark, that just indicates where that,
The pitched roof, yes,
Where the
yeah,
pitched roof
the
is.
sawtooth roof is,
Okay.
correct.
Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. So even though it's red, which is very poor, it's still got like a 1 to 3 year, so we shouldn't have any problems.
If we do, if we have work orders, we'll address them. The
Okay.
goal was, how much square foot can you do in a summer, and what's the most important square foot to do? Having that contiguous area, as you can see, it is kind of the heart of the building, and that's where the classrooms are located, so we're gonna take on those square feet. And Mr. Lau and his team will keep an eye on any leaks that form, and we'll get those repaired in the meantime. And yeah, we'll just come back. It should have life in it, but even a new roof can leak.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Frank.
Just a quick question, just about, so a little bit what Tammy was saying. Is the one we're going with for Franklin, but then their bid was so much higher for Cleveland. Do we still trust that that they can do the Franklin at that pace, even though it was so much, it was like double for
Absolutely.
Cleveland?
Yep, they just actually performed at Stevenson, almost the same amount of square footage this past summer. They've performed at other buildings in the district in previous years, so, yeah,
Okay.
we have confidence that they'd be able to get through this.
We don't want to get into their minds, but the best guess is they didn't know how to attack that sawtooth roof and just said, here's a whole lot of hours and here's a whole lot
Yeah,
of work
that
on
makes
it.
sense, right?
And they
It's
put a
not
high
your
number.
specialty, right?
Yeah.
It's not your,
Right.
it takes a lot more time.
It-
And then, oh, go
Well, I'm
ahead.
sorry, and to clarify, it is a lump sum price, so it's not as if they can get on the roof and ask for more money or different
Yes.
hours, so,
Yeah.
for the Franklin project.
Right, right. And I just wanted to say too, I think that's a large amount of money. It's different than what we normally do in our process. But at the same time, we sitting around the board are not engineers, and we're not making that decision, and we are not tasked with determining which company we go with. We are tasked with approving what you guys have done. You are the engineers, you are the experts in the area, and so we're not talking a lot about it in terms of why, tell us about the reason exactly, because we're not engineers sitting around here. We are overseers, and I think for the community, I think that's really important to know. We are overseers to make sure of your decision that what you've already made. And so we thank you for bringing the stakeholders to the table and the experts in the field. And so the questions that we're asking are to make sure that what we're approving is right and well thought of, but we're not getting in the weeds. It's not our job to get into the weeds and figure out all of the dynamics of a roofing because of a roof system, because that's not what we're called to do at the board table. But thank you for all your work.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on this item? All righty, we'll move on to 3B, which is.
Thank you, Mr. Weber.
Thank you.
Yes, you're not leaving yet.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's right, he's coming back.
I'm going to ask Mr. Harry Lau to join us at the table for the next topic.
Mr. Robert's going to be with us also? Okay.
Hello, sir.
Mr. Lau is the Administrator of Facilities and Operations for Livonia Public Schools.
And Mr. Francis, if I can interrupt you for just a second, just for the public who may be listening either now or some other day, the item that we're on right now is item 3B, presentation for boilers, district-wide energy savings.
And we are not here this evening on this topic to ask for approval of any funds or to try to begin a new project. Really what we're here for is to give a brief overview of a project we've been working on for several years, and that is the boiler replacement projects at our buildings. We did have a few slides, and I don't know if that's up and available. Nope, not that slide right there. I guess we don't have it available to them right now. Yeah. No, I gave it to, I sent it in earlier. We might have a little glitch.
Technically, Emily's,
If we can pause just for a moment, it would be, there's only a few slides, but it's nice for the folks at home and for you to be able to see some of the information on that,
While we're
showing
at-
some of
yeah.
the energy savings that we've had.
While we're on a brief pause, I'd like to thank the entire Plant Moran and Cabinet team for bringing the board out to the Early Childhood Center this past week to see the progress. It is really exciting. I mean, beyond looking at a piece of land and largely a building that had been destructed, it was very exciting last week to be able to get in there and walk through and see at least the beams up, and we could walk through and get a feel for where classroom space is, how large it is, the large open areas inside of each of the houses, as we're calling them. It was very, very exciting, and I understand that it's progressing quickly. So thank you for taking the time out to allow us to all put on flat shoes and hard hats and get over there and take a look at it. It's very exciting seeing it come to life. I know I've had members of the community ask me about the progress on it. And anticipated opening and so forth, and some of them just right down to what's going on behind all that fencing over there. So it's very exciting, and it's exciting seeing something that really is going to be state of the art. So thank you again for taking the time out to have the rest of us over there who don't have the privilege of walking through there every day. Having not seen it in a handful of months, it was just enormous, the progress that was made all of a sudden.
Yep.
So,
That was fun. That was very good to see.
yep. Did you want to add anything, Mr. Robert?
No, I thank you guys for, or thank you all for coming out and
Oh,
taking the time. The team is excited as well, the construction team. It's progressing well. Roofing going on, exterior walls are going up, windows are going in. So we're out there today actually too, looking at some window installation. So a lot of progress. Every day it seems like something else new is popping up there. But thank you again for taking the time. It's exciting we can show off to you guys what the community's worked for, and it'll be exciting building once done.
absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, it looks like we're ready to go.
We are ready now.
Yep. And so basically, what we wanted to just run through is some information about, now that we have the new boilers in all of our locations, we wanted to talk a little bit about the types of the reduction of our carbon footprint, the rebates that we had received from the energy companies, and generally just the energy that is being saved. And, Mr. Lau had, back in 2018, started this, and I believe Frost was the first one as the pilot, if you will. And it was very successful in seeing just the footprint, the physical footprint that we reduced, but also our carbon footprint and how much electricity and gas that we were using, how much less on those units, and still heating that building very well. So I'll take a moment and I'll let Harry, if you want to talk a little bit about just the idea of making the switch and the reasons that you believed that it would be a successful project.
Well, I think most of us understand the condensing boiler and how efficient it can be, particularly at lower temperatures of operating, where most boilers have to operate at 160 degrees. These can actually operate at 100 and still produce heat out of a coil. And where this is especially efficient is in the shoulder months when you're cooling and heating all in one day. So you can cool it down and warm it up in the same day. Interestingly enough, when we look at some of these reductions, the pumping is the biggest one because we were pumping a lot of gallons per minute, which means that it was circling the building so fast, we were not pulling heat out of the coil. As a matter of fact, we'd only lose 2 to 3 degrees from the furthest end of the building back, and now we're losing 15 to 20. So that means we're really efficiently pulling the heat into the spaces.
So having it drop that many degrees is a signal that we're actually using the energy to heat the spaces as opposed to just spinning it around and around.
It's coming back warm. At the time I came here in 2014, we all remember the Arctic vortex. Well, I was in boiler rooms with Wayne Roberts at the time, and boilers were only firing for like 5 minutes. And one of these boilers that need to operate at 160, they should be one boiler for hours at like 180. And so we were short cycling and actually had to take stages of fire off so they wouldn't turn on, turn off, turn on, turn off. Looked like a Christmas tree in the boiler room, just coming off and on. So now one boiler on any given cool day will run for hours. So. But my reason for the pumping is if we could have reduced the pumping, or we had the opportunity, but the piping size was too large. So we got 64% less piping, but it could have been as much as 75.
When we started the replacement, really, just to the idea, we knew we had to replace the boilers that were there already. They were from the 90s.
Mid-90s.
So we knew that we had to have those replaced, but instead of doing exact in kind, here he brought the idea forward to say, we're gonna heat better, and we're gonna use less energy in heating these spaces. And as you said, in those shoulder seasons, in that early spring or that late fall, when you sort of have those odd days where you wake up in the morning and it's really chilly, and then by the afternoon, it's suddenly warming up again. It works outstandingly in those portions of the season. So on our screen, we just have some of the information. Sorry, I have to take a look at it a little better. We have, as you can see, the 89 boilers that were replaced in 24 different sites. And this was all from the sinking fund and as well as the capital projects fund we used. Majority of it was via the sinking fund that was approved by our voters for a 10-year span, which we greatly appreciate. This was one of the pieces when we talked to our community about approving a 10-year sinking fund. One of the big pieces was replacing the boilers in our rooms. Another big talking point was replacing our roofs, and we just got done talking about our roofs a moment ago. So thank you to the community for supporting the district in this endeavor. You can see with regard to a 63% reduction in the natural gas consumption and a 64% reduction in the electricity consumption. Obviously the gas, the BTUs, is how we're heating. The pumps are what's pushing, with the electricity is what's pushing the water. And you might recall that it was, I believe, was it consumers or DTE that came?
Consumers.
It was consumers that came with the big check we had last year, and we have rebates in almost $194,000 in rebates in those energy savings. So, and we now have energy savings month over month and year over year in our bills. Some pictures for you. You can see the left side. These are both Jackson. The left side was the old system, and the right side is the new system. You can tell it's just a smaller footprint, it's more condensed, and it's just more efficient. And this one, I think when we get to Churchill, you can really see anything happening on the left. There's so many pipes and metal and everything around, and you can see on the right-hand side how simple the system is. And Harry, even though we have multiple boilers, I think we have six boilers or over at Churchill?
Yes, 6.
We really don't have to run all 6 the majority of the time. You can run most of these buildings not at full capacity. You have the capacity if needed, but we can still run less than and heat the building because of the efficiency that Harry was talking about. We're actually extracting heat from it as it travels the building.
Which will give it a longer life,
Mhm.
right?
25 years is a basic
Yeah.
life of boiler. But I do want to say also that we have the redundancy needed in case it gets extremely cold, like in 14 and 15. So we reduced from 20 million down to 16, and we still have the redundancy to heat the building if it gets very cold out.
And this sheet just is a pretty simple building by building. You can see the reductions in both the BTUs and electricity across the board at each building. And you can just see how the reduction here is just massive, especially at our larger buildings.
Is that 133 million?
Yes, reduction in
Yes.
BTUs.
Yes,
Wow.
more than 133 million BTUs. Mhm. So it's one of those behind the scenes items that people don't think about. Cold day, warm building, until it's not working. So before they stopped working, we were able to make those replacements and basically upgrade, in our opinion, what the district is using. So just wanted to bring it to everybody's attention and thank the community for their support. Is there anything else you wanted to add to it?
I just want to say that the replacement happened at a good time, 'cause we had several, upwards of 6, that actually had failed and we had to shut off. So there was enough redundancy to get through it, because we considered that we had 200 BTUs per square foot in most buildings. Right now, we're down to like 20.
It was what they would call over-engineering it back when they originally, they really over-engineered to make sure, thinking that they had enough. But the system you have now is still more than necessary. It already has its own redundancy built into it.
It's
much smaller.
right-sized. So I do want to mention Performance Engineering, who did a lot of this, working with UBS, who did a lot of the engineering for this. It's hard to find somebody who doesn't just like to overlay what they did in the past and really calculate what you need.
So we appreciate that partnership with them, but I want to thank you for, you spearheaded this. This was your idea, and it was a very successful one, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Harry.
Harry, hang on just a moment. Mr. Lau, before you leave, hang on a moment. You have questions, comments, all kinds of excited people here.
I thought you wanted to talk
Mrs.
until
O'Quist.
midnight.
Yes, I did just want to, I wanted to reiterate what Mr. Francis just said, that Mr. Lau really was the catalyst to get this going. And if you remember that first pilot at Frost, and he was very closely monitoring and working very closely with our contractors to determine if this new system would be as energy efficient, as well as efficient in heating our schools as we thought it would be. And when you take a look at that combined with, again, the message as Phil shared at the beginning, that the community gave us when we were going back out for the sinking fund and for the bond, quite frankly, they spoke quite a bit to wanting us as a large organization running 25 different facilities across the community to be as energy efficient and as energy conscious as possible. And when you see the drastic reduction in energy consumption for an organization our size that has taken place with this boiler replacement, we felt this was worthy of something to share with you, the board, as well as our community. So we will be sharing highlights of this in the LPS link, as well as our dialogue, because we know that this is important to the community as a whole. And while our internal communications go to thousands of families and staff, we know that the greater community, you know, most of them do not have children in our schools. So we want to be sure that they know that their investment in Livonia Public Schools via the sinking fund and the bond was a worthy investment. And so, you know, these three folks up here are three of the people that we entrust to make those dollars happen and be put to good use. So thanks to each of you for your work on this. And again, a special thanks to Harry for shepherding this project all the way through. And we now have new boiler systems in every single one of our schools and facilities.
Any other comments or questions? Mrs. Bonnefield?
When you come with the presentation, the second presentation, can you maybe talk about, how long it'll take us to recoup our investment on that?
We can work on that. We're not doing this presentation again.
No, I mean, I thought you said you were, I misunderstood then. Sorry.
That's okay. The next presentation tonight, or?
No, I thought that he said you were gonna-
Presenting the board.
No, we were saying here, but we can try, but it's an imperfect calculation, and we could approximate that, and to be only be fair, we'd also want to pull out what it costs to put them in, but we would have had to replace anyway, so there's a few ways we can go with that. So I don't want to try to hide anything. I'd maybe just, we can get an approximation and give the board that information as the best that we can calculate.
I think
That'd be fair?
The information is that if these boilers are gonna last 20 or 25 years, and we've recouped our investment in approximately 5 years, right, or 10 years, whatever it takes, that it shows that it's, in the end, it's gonna be a long-term gain.
Yeah,
There would be a lot of assumptions in that. I mean, the two biggest points, Ms. Bonnefield, is the cost of reducing the boilers, and if we were to have replaced them one for one. So there's your savings, and then your overall carryover of BTUs not used. So it's, as Mr. Francis said, it's kind of hard to put a hard number on it.
yeah.
And if I'm asking for too much?
If
it's gonna be misleading?
No, yeah, I have no objection to doing it, other than we don't know what the future price of gas would be, future price of electricity would be. We'd have to hold it constant just to be fair, and then it just probably isn't a great number, but it's absolutely something we can give a delta of a plus minus. Right around here, is where we'd probably break even, so we can put something together.
And maybe even the cost of a
Yeah.
one-for-one replacement, the
Yeah.
cost of,
That-
if we
Yeah.
were still consuming that
That would
amount
be
of
a fair
energy at
assumption.
the rate we
Yeah.
were prior, we could certainly show some of those differentials.
Yeah, no, we can give it a go. I just didn't want to be disingenuous to think, well, here's the,
No.
it'll be a little squishy, but we can work on it.
No, and I certainly don't want you to spend a ton of time on something that's not gonna be pertinent to what we're doing either. So if you can come up with something, that's great, but
Okay.
don't
Hey,
go.
Brian, come up with something, would you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, you guys-
We'll find something, absolutely.
Sorry.
No,
All
it's-
right, but please don't spend a ton of time on it if it's something that you can
No, it's a
kind of
good question, though.
ballpark.
And even right now, it's knowing that we're saving nearly $2 million in energy savings, that literally would have gone out the window, that is exciting. Mrs. Jarvis?
In addition to the wonderful savings, these numbers are amazing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the new boilers, are they not easier to use and easier to monitor?
Yes.
I think that was one of the main features that was attractive when those were selected.
There's a lot less bells and whistles on it, I suppose. It's a pretty straightforward vessel. I would agree with that statement, particularly to maybe a fin tube type boiler or, yes.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Thank you very much. Thank you,
you.
Mr. Lau, for bringing
Thanks,
this to our attention and I mean, to the district's attention that we had this opportunity.
Thank you.
And I'm glad the technology does improve, and it certainly should improve, over a 25-year period.
Yes.
But I'm glad that we were, willing and able to take advantage of that. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry, tried to run off like that.
I'm sorry.
You don't get away from this group that fast.
You can run, but you can't hide here.
Travels home.
Thanks.
Thank you. The next item under Building and Site is item 3C, 2024 DD presentation, MPR in French. And I'll turn it back over again to Mr. Francis.
Thank you very much. We have another presentation this evening. Amy Neckert from French Associates Architects is joining us at the table. We have a presentation for the board and for those at home, twofold. And by the way, I'll give that to you, right and left, moving forward. And we're going to start with summer 2023 projects that we just did, some before and after pictures of the buildings. And then Amy will get into the design of the 2024 buildings. Now, some of this, and of course, stop us if you have a question on something. We're probably not gonna linger as long as we did the first year or even last year. because, you know, some of these design features are pretty much becoming standard in the buildings, things like the flex classroom, the kitchen changes, et cetera. So just for the sake of everybody's time, we are gonna probably have a bit shorter than it was that first time we ever saw any of these items. But don't let that stop you from saying, hold on a second, what is that piece right there, and what am I looking at? So I just wanna give that little disclaimer on it.
Okay, fire away.
Well, thank you, everybody, for having me back again.
welcome.
You'll notice that Katie has officially retired.
Yes,
We were really
yes.
hoping not, but, so, yeah, like Phil said, we're just gonna kind of walk through the 2023 projects here. Okay, so we'll start with Cleveland. You'll see on the left is before and after. It'll be similar for most of the spaces except for the kitchen. So these are pretty, dated designs, so we're just going to kind of walk through. You can see this is the LMC. Inside the LMC, we created the Idea Factory. Idea Factories are, kind of unique to each building. And then we also created the flex space out of the existing computer room in this one, spruced it up with some bright colors.
Couple of quick items, on the flex classroom and in most of the Idea Factories, we're also having the teaching setup. So like a classroom has the whiteboard, the short throw, the interactive short throw, the sound system, et cetera. Those are going in there because they can double as presentation spaces or teaching spaces. The Idea Factory, we have some of our Project Lead the Way classes inside there. So some of them we have to go back and retrofit from 2022 because in the Idea Factories, we didn't have those items. But we're making those teaching spaces and looking and having the same technology as any traditional classroom.
Yeah, mobile furniture is a really important feature in all these spaces. The kitchen, so this was a very dated kitchen and we spruced it up, much more functional, easier to clean.
The floor on these kitchens, if it wasn't, most of them got the new flooring. It's a specialized floor. It's got, I call it just like a slip resistant or a grip in it, a little bit of grit. And you can just hose the whole thing down if you needed to. It's really one of these specialized floors made for this function. We do have some buildings in the district that the kitchen has the terrazzo. When we have that, we aren't taking those out. So just like with the restrooms, if it's got the terrazzo, we want to keep that because that's just been, you really can't reproduce that anymore, at least not at a reasonable cost. So you'll sometimes not see that floor in a kitchen. It's because you're seeing terrazzo instead.
We'll move to Rosedale. So great view before and after. The new pops of color we added. All the bookcases are mobile that are not against the wall. The Idea Factory, this one was had students in it, so you can see them, interacting with the furniture pieces, the bright lighting, and colors as well.
And really getting some depth to the ceilings, et cetera, as well. That's been a feature that French has put in to the libraries and into those Idea Factories, is having some just different layers. You all were at Frost last week, and you could see just how that comes out. And I know we have a picture of that coming up, but it just, when you're, in a picture doesn't do it justice, getting that dimension that occurs with the architectural features that they put into it.
And one thing with Rosedale is we try to engage the students in the hallway so they can walk by and see a peek of what's going on, want to be intrigued to walk into those spaces. This is the view of the flex space that shows the nano wall, so how you can open it up and create that enlarged space for teaching. The kitchen here was very tiny. It was basically a storage room. So we kind of flip-flopped the gym storage and created a bigger kitchen with an overhead coiling grill to really enlarge that space for the staff.
It was the one wish that when we first walked by there, and they just said, just make it bigger.
It was tiny. Riley, very dated 80s looking, so we opened that up, so it's a very engaging space. Here's another view of the LMC. So at Riley, we don't have the Idea Factory in the space. They already had their maker space, so we did not touch that space during the renovation. We had the flex space just like all the other spaces. This one was very wide to allow more students in there.
The colors at the Riley LMC too, I mean, personally, I just think they look dynamite. When taken separately, you say, is that really gonna all come together? And then you're in the space, and it looks fantastic. I mean, everything ties together.
The kitchen here, the footprint did not change much, but the equipment, bringing that up, making it a very clean, easy-to-use space for the staff. And this one did get the new flooring over that existing quarry tile floor.
They also added AC in the kitchens. You let them know they put AC in the kitchen too.
Oh, yes, and the kitchens now have AC, so they won't be so hot. Frost, very similarly here to Riley, we opened that space up. This one does have the Idea Factory, you kind of see it back in that little corner. Really creating some unique spaces within it's a big box basically, so creating space within the box.
Being there last week, I mean, it just works. I worked in that building, and I remember that being just this cavernous library, and now it's still the same size, except the spaces have some definition and some purpose, and it makes all the difference in the world. Plus, the color, the dimension, the furniture all helps as well, but it's got some definition now. And I know the media specialist over there was just over the moon last week when you all were there to see it.
The Idea Factory, very similar to the other spaces. This one actually has the storage units up, which I think they're working on putting those in each of the spaces. They're very flexible. They come on a track. You can switch them out. Very nice for whatever that room becomes throughout the years. Here's a view of the flex space. So like we use existing open space and basically just put that nano wall up so you can close it off if you need to. If not, you can have open just like it was before. The kitchen, so this one you can tell, had the terrazzo, so we did keep it because it was in very good condition. But we spruced it up. We pulled out any curbs that were there, so everything's easily rollable and movable. We painted the walls so that they're very clean, easy cleanable, and a new ceiling. The ceiling was quite dated and dingy. Franklin. So similarly to Frost, Franklin's footprint didn't really change, but we wanted to create those spaces within the space. A lot was done with furniture to do that, and then we added some lighting to kind of bring you into that tall space, but not block your view because there's some beautiful curved windows along the one side and clear story on the other, and just bringing it up to today's standards with colors and textures. Here's another view looking into that space. And then the flex space, just like all the other ones, has the nano wall, has the movable furniture, a teaching wall, just creates another space for learning. The kitchen here was also terrazzo, so that remained, and we updated the equipment to function for both the kitchen staff and the culinary staff at this building. So the students are in half of it, so we kind of created half for kitchen, half for culinary before they were kind of mixed together. We helped separate those functions.
As you recall, the Patriot Inn is there, and the LCTC culinary program is there. And Amy's right, they would be in each other's space at times at the same time, so there was a little bit more delineation for their equipment. There's just a lot of equipment at the Franklin kitchen because the traditional kitchen and the program.
Any questions about the 2023 work? I know a lot of you have visited,
Fabulous.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
kind of getting the little odds and ends picked up, but it looks like most of them are functioning, so great to see kids engaging in them too. We'll move on to the 2024 projects. So we have 5 renovation projects in this batch. So we'll walk through each of, oops, we're going too fast there. We'll start with Hayes Elementary School. So just like we've done in the past, we've divided it up into spaces. So we've got the media center, we've got the kitchen. Those are the bulk of the spaces. And then we've walked through each building and asked the staff, what do you need? What's been lacking here? What didn't get picked up in the previous bond work, or what's changed since? So at Hayes, the media center, we'll go into that one on the next slide, but one of the concerns was the flooring in the toilet rooms. Most of them are terrazzo. There's a couple that you'll see in orange that will get the epoxy flooring. Those have ceramic tile, we'll just epoxy over it. But the terrazzo just needs to be grinded and polished, spruced up, since over the years it's just a little lackluster. So we're gonna pick up any doors, which are mostly interior class, like toilet room doors and workroom doors, replace those with a matching door to the hallway doors. Door hardware, making sure that we have levers. A part of the other project that's being done this fall is the security upgrade, so you won't see as many of those items in here, but
We're picking up those flip blocks, et cetera, in the package that the board approved that's gonna go on this fall and winter.
so we're trying to, get ahead of things, because this will still take until this coming summer. At this building, they had a lot of extra staff, like, forget what you guys call it. Ancillary staff. So they needed to create additional office space. So you'll see, like, out in the library, they created a couple of resource rooms. We created a small conference space for them, so those staff had a place that they could go into when not with students. For the kitchen, this was the biggest change. This kitchen, you can see, is there an arrow to this guy?
Yeah, if you float it around, it'll show up, but I don't know how to use it.
You can see that arrow to the bottom. That's where the existing kitchen is. It's just a basically small storage room that was on the opposite side of the gymnasium. It had a small coiling door, which didn't actually function for lunch times. So the staff was actually having to roll everything out into the gymnasium. So if you've been to Randolph or Rosedale, we're putting in that large coiling door to open up during lunch times so that the staff can easily have the kids flow through the line. So we're creating a very linear kitchen. We're really restricted. If you've ever been to Hayes, there's a lot of equipment, a lot of piping in that back area. So in order to get this kitchen in there and still meet all the codes that were required, we ended up with this like linear box. And then we were able to get the walk-in cooler in the corner as well. So
You can see, if you look left and then you look to the right, all that green to the right is the new, but just next to it, that little area that looks like an office was the kitchen, or is the current kitchen. It really was a tough setup, and this one took a few tries at it, and really working with the building principal, working with our team, Amy going over it repeatedly, coming up with a design that I know that they're excited about with regard to the principal, the kitchen staff, the kitchen workers are excited about how that's gonna play out with regard to serving students and having a little bit more space in there.
And then this also allowed them to get a couple extra tables in there, which was really important to the principal. So they're getting 3 extra of the tables that will mount to the wall and fold down. So they won't have to worry about the ones that roll around and having to store those.
Because they picked up that wall.
Yes.
So you were able to close off where the old kitchen was, so you picked up wall space to be able to put the tables in, right?
Correct.
Yeah, that would be a game changer.
Worked out well.
And then the wall that is the new serving line is behind a backstop, so the basketball hoop would limit them to have the chairs there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it was really nice that we're able to get the walk-in that corner, rather than them having to walk outside. Anywhere outside was not ideal, so.
It was tough. There's already sheds there, et cetera. There wasn't really a lot of space to put one up, so it worked out. It was, again, this one took a few swings at it.
And that also took with some compromises. The custodial staff moved into another space that was previously a conference area, so we kind of compromised. They had a lot of needs here, so I think it worked out really well. For the media center, the LMC, we basically created some zones here. The existing classroom in the upper right corner is going to turn into the Idea Factory, very similar to the other ones. And then we kind of notched out a space for that flex space in the upper left corner with the nano wall. And then the remaining area, it will be the flexible seating, bookcases. Just to note, we haven't finalized any furniture layouts yet. This is just pictorial to kind of get your spatial scale. Our interior designer is going to be working with the teams at each building and going through those in the coming weeks. And this is where we created 2 resource rooms as requested by the principal based on the staffing needs. So there's 2 in the lower right corner, and then we have the LMC office. In this case, the LMC specialist wanted the office and the workroom to be open to each other, so it was more flexible, so we didn't put a wall between them. In other spaces, you'll see that there is a wall dividing them. It was just up to each staff at the buildings. And this is a view into just a really preliminary rendering. In December, we'll be doing the actual walkthroughs like we did last year of 3 of the buildings. So you'll get to see each space with their actual finishes, furniture. This is just when we're talking through spaces and trying to explain them to the staff. This is kind of one of the pieces we use. And this is looking at the flex space. Because this had the clear story windows above, we had to create kind of like a soffit space above that glass wall. And so we kind of kept this band around that soffit space, kind of angles backwards to still allow the clear story light to come in. We'll move to Hoover. Hoover is very similar to Hayes in the regard to the flooring, the epoxy flooring of the toilet rooms, upgrading any interior doors. This one has very few because a lot of the doors were actually in good condition. Trying to think. This one's actually a little bit more unique in the regards that the Idea Factory is outside of the media center. So when we get to that space, this was a decision based on our limitations of the existing LMC space. And then very similar to Kennedy, the layout for the kitchen. So the kitchen space, like before, was very narrow, storage closet size. We didn't relocate it, but what we did is we took, there was a tech space. We kind of shifted it down to gain us a little bit extra space in that kitchen. Unlike Kennedy, we didn't gain as much square footage by taking the 2 double doors out of the gymnasium, but we gained more functionality of that space. So we got the new equipment, we enlarged the coiling doors. They will be motorized for easy use, and then the students can just queue through and pick up their lunches. And then the lower left-hand corner is the storage room, and then the desk for the staff to take orders. Oh, to note, you can see like in green over on the right hand, but further to the left, that is the outdoor walk-in cooler, very similar to Kennedy. We just could not fit that in the space. So it'll be the same setup. For the Hoover LMC space, like I said, we ended up taking over a classroom in the dark blue for the Idea Factory. And in order to make that more engaging, one of Phil's ideas was that we put some corridor windows in. So we ended up putting some of those circular windows in the corridor to engage students as they walk by, since it wouldn't otherwise be easily recognizable as some different space. And then very similar to Kennedy, the classroom is turning into a flex space, so that will have the nano wall. But unlike Kennedy, the books and everything are going to be more towards the lower side. She has in her teaching layout, she's going to have more in the center space where the students are going to kind of lounge and read books, or they're going to have their reading circle. So there's not necessarily 2 teaching spaces in this like Kennedy. So a lot different feel to it. And then her office, same thing, she wanted it open with the workspace. And we created, the reason that we had to move the Idea Factory out is because they did need 2 resource rooms, and those are in the lower right corner. And then they had a need for their workroom and a conference space. So we made sure we kind of broke out those spaces.
That idea actually came from the building. The principal and the media specialist said, you know, we have the classroom right here. It's right next to us, and we could then get everything we've been there was only so much square foot, so we could do it, and the beauty of it, because when they explained it to us, my first thought was, wait, we're gonna lose a classroom. And then I remembered, but we're making it into a classroom. I mean, truly, we're putting in all that equipment to have it be a classroom, and we've made a commitment to Project Lead the Way, so if the worst thing that happens is.
That was currently Project Lead the Way.
Right, and it's already the room that they're using for Project Lead the Way. If we're committing to that, we're gonna just basically make the room that is currently being used for Project Lead the Way into the Idea Factory, which it'll be used for Project Lead. So it just sort of made, it was like a light bulb going off when the principal described it, and we said, yeah, this just makes sense. So it takes a team. I mean, that when you go to Hayes, the principal and the staff there were incredibly helpful in saying, like, if you take away this, it's okay because we're gonna add that, and that's a plus overall, and just all of that type of work. So it was a really good process.
Yeah, we went through many iterations, and staff was really great explaining their needs and how they would use the space. So I think we ended up with a great layout. And then this is just kind of a view. You'd be looking from the flex space into where the book area would be, where her reading circle, the windows would be her office. Roosevelt, for this space, Roosevelt, we had down in the very bottom left, you'll see the green is for the kitchen, so we'll zoom into that. We have a lot of epoxy flooring in this because sometimes in between the toilet rooms in the hallway there is epoxy or ceramic tile, so we just made sure that for cleaning purposes it would be all epoxy in those hallways between classrooms, not the main corridors. One thing here, we're going to add some rubber wall base in the corridors and in the classrooms just to clean up any unfinished areas, because right now you can kind of see where the final butts the wall, and it's got the old glazed CMU. So we'll clean that up. As we zoom into this kitchen, we kept the footprint the same. We removed the little storage room, so it's all open. And we were able to squeeze in the walk-in cooler as well into that space. One of Pat's Schuhart's concerns was that the walk-in cooler would need to be able to hold enough freezer and cooler storage because they'll be feeding all the students in the coming years as proposed by the governor. So we were just planning for the future in all these buildings. Nothing changed with the queue. The students will queue through the line just like normal, but right now there's a recessed floor, so the students would be typically higher up. We're raising that floor so it's level all the way across, one floor plane, which will make it easier for them to roll out like the salad bar or any of the other equipment to clean.
Yeah, uneven floors make things difficult with the
Yeah,
kitchens.
they currently don't meet code, so we just like to bring those up so they're all the same level. Everything will be on casters and wheels as well for cleaning and movability. For this LMC space, it's divided up into the book area, which you'll see, oh, I got my mouse back, all the way over here. And then the flexible seating area. The flex space is right here. It opens up into the greater space. This was a bit of a challenge because this is an add-on space, so breaking into any of the other spaces, we have restrictions. The curved area, basically this whole area was added on, so we know that we had structural elements to kind of have to deal with, so it very limited our openings and widths of things. So we made it work though. We had to, by code, add this little exit alcove so that students, if you're in this flex space that's closed, you have a direct exit if there is an emergency. So there is that now. Their existing computer room in the dark blue is turning into the Idea Factory. And that also has access to the media center space as well as the corridor. And it has a direct exit as well. And then the office right now for the LMC specialist will remain. We'll just kind of spruce it up and add a couple extra windows for visibility for the space. think that's about it. And then this is a image into that space. You'll notice it is very similar in architectural vernacular to Coolidge, but we wanted to make it still unique to each building. So same thing with Stevenson as you see that one. We still want to make them unique spaces.
You talk about the window getting punched into.
Yeah, so as an alternate, we've got 5 windows across this back portion, because right now it is all solid. So that is an alternate to add those windows in there. And then that teacher has some displays that he would put up in between those for use for reading time and whatnot. Another alternate is also to put some operable windows along here to allow them to have a little bit of control.
You know what's interesting about that is it reminds me of what we did with Riley, even though this is an exterior wall. Even in Riley, when we punched in some windows along the
I don't know what the direction that is.
West.
west,
West.
right? West, yeah. The west wall into the hallway, it has added, I mean, you spent some time in the Riley LMC a couple of summers ago, where we held our meetings.
Yes, we did.
And when you think about the impact that even that piece has made, in addition to obviously the lighting and the ceiling and things like that, I think that about Roosevelt, but obviously we'll have to see what the numbers come in.
Yes.
And where we'll be, but that's an interesting thought on this one.
And Holmes, the middle school for this bond work, this one we have a couple little office areas that we're creating, so the little orange area, they needed some ancillary staff space and conference spaces as well. I see that as a theme kind of running with most of these buildings. They have a lot of additional spaces they need to create. And then we have the terrazzo flooring that will get repolished. A couple small areas will get the epoxy flooring, like in the locker room area. That will get some epoxy because it's got the older tile and it's, doesn't smell great. For the kitchen, a layout very similar to Frost if you've been in there. They've got very similar layouts and functions. So we're going to keep that terrazzo floor here. It's in great condition. We're going to remove any curbs to make the equipment roll around easily for cleaning and be at appropriate heights. We're going to add casters to anything existing to remain. Here we've got pieces of equipment that we've worked through with Pat and the team that will remain, but very minimally. The rest of the equipment will be new. And this little storage room down, the yellowish color storage room, that will have epoxy flooring because right now it has VCT flooring. So the rest of the space will just get the polished terrazzo and spruced up. For the media center here, very similar to Frost, it was a big box. So, trying to make that into an engaging space and divide it up, but not divide it up. So you'll see that the book area is to the far, the right in the darker blue, and then the rest of the area would just be flexible seating. And then the flex space is actually going to take over. It's kind of to the lower left next to the dark blue. That will be the flex space. It's taking over basically a computer room right now. We're just popping in a nano wall to allow the flexibility. And then the other computer room is turning into the idea factory. That allowed them to keep their extra, which you can see in the orange, their extra spaces that they needed for resource rooms, small offices, and general classrooms. So we were able to still keep all their additional spaces while creating these new components like the idea factory and the flex space. One thing we did do is on the upper middle basically is the main entrance, but we did create a secondary entrance because a lot of people come through the office here. So we recessed in the doors and created a more engaging space with a little bit more light with the windows to the corridor. And then we created 2 small group rooms that flank each side. And those are all glass. So the staff can easily see into them. And then they also have a small window to the corridor as well. And then this is just a view into the space. So you would be looking into the book area. We've got a little bit of texture with ceiling drops, lighting, very, very similar to what we've been trying to do at like Riley or Frost.
That principal and media specialist took a visit to Frost and came back and said, yeah, that, do that.
And then Stevenson. So, this is the one high school we had for this segment. Very similar to Franklin in the scope, but also different in the way we approached it. We've got several interior doors that are just getting hardware replacements. Most of these doors are hollow metal, so they might just get painted with some new lever hardware versus the knob hardware. Most of the bathrooms are terrazzo, so those will get the grinding and polishing. And then we've got a couple toilet rooms, like in the main office, that will get the epoxy over the existing ceramic tile. The high school, very similarly to Franklin in layout, a little different in function since we don't have the culinary staff here. They had a little extra space. So the serving lines will be spruced up. They're going to add some air screen coolers for flexibility of students grabbing their own milks or fruits. And then in the interior, we took out all the curbs. In this space, the terrazzo was kind of going to get cut up from all the floor drains and other work. So we're going to use the Ultra flooring, that nice commercial grade flooring with a non-slip in here to just cover that up, roll it into one of the walk-in coolers to make sure that we have a continuous flooring that is easy to clean and maintain. We're going to expand the staff's office so they can fit 2 people in there. Since they have this large pizza oven that's going to be taken out, they kind of gained a lot of space with the new ovens, so that allowed them to enlarge their office to fit in there.
So there was some equipment they weren't using.
The pizza oven was
It was
very large.
Classic.
When they first made a pizza?
And then the LMC layout here has some similar components to Franklin, but a little bit different as well in function. So same as Franklin, the flex space will be in that upper right-hand corner. And then we'll have very flexible seating throughout. The darker blue is going to be their book area, so kind of swapped to the way Franklin would be. And then to the lower corner, they wanted to create a more group setting where students could break off into small groups. So they would have high top tables with some type of display, and they could break up into these groups that would fit a full class. Yet they could still be flexible and say only 5, groups want to go over there. The rest of them could go out into the main area and break up as well. This LMC office would be very similar to Franklin in that it would be at that point looking out into the entire space for visibility. And then this is just very similar view into the space. So we're looking kind of towards that group area. So you can see the little displays. There'd be some high top tables. And like I said, furniture eventually will be finalized, but that was the idea, is that she would have one little group area that the students could gather. Toilet rooms, just the same thing we've done at others. One toilet room per school will get the tile in it typically, and then the epoxy flooring where there's not terrazzo floor. And then
Updates on the 2 offices, right? We are going to do some updates in the 2 assistant principal's offices or Stevenson.
Oh, yeah, so if we go back, and you can see it in the little red, one side flanking the media center is kind of like the deeper red. Those, there's like a scheduling office and assistant principal office. Those will get new casework, new finishes, so they kind of match the front office.
They weren't hit in the last one.
Yeah, when we walk through the space, we were just like, oh, that kind of looks dated. Let's bring that up for functionality too, because they had a big front check-in surface that was no longer used the way it was designed for. So just making it more functional for them. Any questions?
Questions, comments on this section? Mrs. Frank?
It looks great. It's so impressive with all the work that you're doing. Just that you said about Stevenson at the last second. There's 3 assistant principals and you're only updating 2 because the first one was done at the beginning of at the
I'll
front
catch-
office.
Yeah, I'll catch that. So
Yeah.
the front office
Was done.
was done in the last bond.
Yes.
And that is the principal's office specifically and 1 assistant principal's office in that front main office. The other 2, the scheduling office and the business office
Yeah.
were not. So we're going into both of those, carpet, ceiling tiles, cabinet, it's got that 90s look to it right
Yes.
now.
Yeah.
And I dig the 90s, but we're gonna bring it up to now.
Perfect.
Yes.
Other comments or questions?
That's great.
Mr. Francis, kind of piggybacking on that, you said that was going on at Stevenson. What about our other 2 high schools?
So at Franklin, we did do the front office in the last bond. They had an update to the attendance office. They had new carpet in there, but then we went in and put in some cabinetry. And then the far back, it's in a little bit different area than it is at Stevenson, but it's in the furthest back. That's the scheduling office. It's all been redone this past summer.
Okay.
It looks, actually, we were there, Mr. Etu and I went there a couple of Fridays ago, and we were like, wow, this does look really dynamite, because it's all kind of put together again.
Okay.
And then, once we get to Churchill, it shouldn't be a question, because if you recall, they took every office and put it into the front. So all 3 assistant
Okay.
principals and the principal are in a brand-new office from the last bond.
Okay. So this brings Stevenson up to par with
Correct.
Franklin, Churchill are going. If we can go back to Hoover, the classroom that had been for Project Lead the Way and is now the Idea Factory, I might not be understanding something correctly. The Project Lead the Way would be used as a regular classroom throughout the week. And then how would that be the same space as the Idea Factory where teachers can be bringing their classes in to use that? It seems like we're using the same space for 2 purposes at the same time.
With the addition of Project Lead the Way at elementary as another special, some of the buildings are using their Idea Factory as the Project Lead the Way space during the day. So they are using it and utilizing it because they see the marriage between the STEM work of Project Lead the Way and the STEM work of the Idea Factory, and saying, let's utilize it fully throughout the day as the classroom for the Project Lead the Way class. So all the students can come in throughout the day and utilize it. And then if there's other times, whether it's a club or whatever, it'll still obviously be available for them as well. So that's something that's not 100% every space, because quite frankly, obviously we haven't gotten to all the elementary schools yet to convert those. But that is an option that some have done. Like I know that if you go into Rosedale, they're using their Idea Factory as the classroom for the Project Lead the Way teacher, and brings those students in and they teach in there during the day.
Okay, so is the Project Lead the Way using that space each hour through the day, or is it periodically available, at given days and times that other teachers can come in and use it as an Idea Factory? Or is it the situation where once it's determined that it is the Project Lead the Way classroom, it is not open for a teacher bringing his or her class in for a given hour for a project?
In those schools, the way I've seen it being utilized and the way the schedules are, the vast majority of the day is that teacher's space with those specials.
Okay. Is that taking any, I get the major benefit to the Project Lead the Way. Are we losing anything then by not having a separate Idea Factory that we've had in some of the other elementary schools? I mean,
Yeah,
and there may or may not be anything we can do about that, even if that is the case.
obviously space is a premium, as
Yes.
we all know, but the intent with the Idea Factories to have folks utilize it during the day, my point of view on it is when folks started having that conversation, and Mr. Green was involved with that, and some different teachers and some different principals, it hit me almost like a ton of bricks finally that said, what do we want with that space? We want kids in it, we want kids using it. That's what's gonna be happening now when you're using it with students, because we know that a teacher is gonna have students in there working on STEM projects all day, every day.
Okay.
And
As
I went,
opposed to
it just, it
periodically
was one of those like,
sometimes.
yeah, I mean, that's what we wanted. The whole intention was to use it, so now we know it's being used. I think they're gonna evolve, just like everything does. Things will evolve and spaces will evolve, and some schools will not use it at first, and then others might, those same schools might say we will. For right now, though, we have that space, and we're utilizing that space. And I know that Mr. Green, also, if he was here, he would say he was in full support of that, because he wanted students using it as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think too, we did not have Project Lead the Way. We had a vision to have a K-12 STEM pathway of some sort. And I think we envisioned the Idea Factory to be a makerspace that, when possible, teachers or media specialists could use that space to inspire students in innovative and creative thinking about problem solving and collaboration. And then as we piloted Project Lead the Way, really that conversation began to say, might this not be the perfect space to have that class? And so I would agree that with the Idea Factories, we certainly don't want them to sit dormant in any way, shape, or form. And we also know that with the way that the elementary day is structured, it is very full. It is very full. And so now that we've had the marriage of having the time with the Idea Factories being built and the installation of Project Lead the Way in every school, it really seems to make sense that those spaces are fully utilized. In places where they are not the Project Lead the Way classroom, they would certainly still be open for the media specialist or classroom teachers to utilize as a maker space. But in this way, we're assured that they're being utilized to the fullest extent. So hopefully that helps. But lots of dialogue went into the purposeful use of those spaces.
Okay.
The uniqueness of the space and the furniture that's in it is really something that ties right in with the ability to do some of those projects.
Thank you for that, clarifying it for me. My next question is, have we seen, even as we're beginning to progress through this, an uptick in the usage of the LMC, particularly at the secondary level? I would hope so, and I know we're going toward making that space more of a more updated, more user-friendly space. We may or may not have the data on that yet, even if it's anecdotal. What are we seeing? I'm hoping that that's a more used space now that we've brought it.
You're right, I don't have data, I have anecdotes, I have conversations, I have a media specialist who's coming out of his skin, and some of the teachers in that building, because they're so excited to have it. They wanted some special whiteboards for the math department wants to start utilizing the space. They want to have these whiteboards for students to use individually. They have a place that they can hang them up and pull them down and move around with them. I know that for a fact that the Frost staff is very excited to have theirs. I don't have data on Emerson, they've had theirs, but frankly, they had one arm tied behind their back for a while last year. It didn't open for a very long time, and that poor media specialist kept waiting to stack it up. I know they're using their Idea Factory, and we've had conversations about how do you clean these tops, because the kids are using them, and like what's the, exactly, so they're getting utilization over there, and Frost is gonna be utilizing theirs, and those are the only two we have so far at the secondary. Franklin does not have an Idea Factory though, so it's just the middle schools. So right now, 2 out of 3 are doing their spaces. Now the library specifically over at Franklin, when I've gone through there a couple of times, I went over there for a meeting, I think last Friday, and it was that dream scenario of there was like a student by themselves at a table working on something. There were a couple in a booth over here by the window. I was probably talking too loud to the media specialist because they were all working. I forgot where I was because we were excited as to what was going on. And she's still working on getting her books all laid out. She wanted to have some new purchases because they do a lot of purging beforehand. So they're seeing activity. Those high schools, the hope was that it would be they're still high schoolers, not saying you need to be like you're in college, but it has that feel too.
Exactly.
It's got that open space.
Yep.
They've got the areas, and there were just kind of students in all different areas of that place. And some were together, and some were just kind of quietly on their own. And it was 9 o'clock in the morning, and it was being utilized. So, the more we go along, I think the media specialists themselves will have to get used to the space they're in. The folks have been in those other spaces previously. They had sort of how they navigated them with their kids, and now they're starting to come up with ideas of getting students in there and how do you use it a little bit differently. So it's very anecdotal, but just because I popped in one time and there were a bunch of kids in there doesn't mean it's always filled, but at the same time, walking in there one time without anybody in it doesn't mean it's always empty either.
Right. Yeah, I'd like to hear some feedback as we go along
Mhm.
the way, especially at the secondary level. At the elementary level,
Yeah.
kids are racing to get there all the time, every year, every day. That's not the question there. But I'd love to hear some feedback on the secondary, both middle school and high school, how that usage is. And I agree, we're obviously purposely designing that to be more of almost a college feel, student center type feel. So I'm hoping that does attract more students to use that for a variety of purposes. But as we go down the way, if you guys could get back with us on that, that would be terrific. So, Mrs. Bradford?
Thanks. Just to piggyback off that, the mascot time and everything, it's possible the kids are utilizing those rooms when they have that time to
Yeah.
move about the school. So I'm assuming they go
I
into
hope
those
so.
areas.
You know, I was like, you
and
could
work,
feel it.
work in there.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
I did just have a question.
Yes.
Maybe this is a Mr. E2 question, but are we utilizing, is the LMC a spot for mascot times? Like, do kids, are they like assigned the LMC or they can go there from their homeroom? Is they can go there, they have an option to go there, or no? They can, but the LMC is not like a homeroom? Like, okay. And then the other question is, just because it does look so amazing, and I know we have to be careful with food and spills and that sort of thing, can they utilize it during lunch? Like, are they allowed to go in those fun spots, the LMC, just because it seems like the books are more put away, they're more like on flexible carts. Are they allowed to, I mean, I just love the booths, we've spent so much money in it. I know we have to be careful, and I'm sure that the LMC teachers are like, no food in here, but I do think that's a great option. Like when we were at Frost last weekend, and they talked about the kids that are just have a hard time in the lunchroom. So do you know, or maybe that is another Mr. E2, are we allowing them to go in there during lunch?
During their lunch periods, they can go there. I can't, I'm gonna try to be very nice and not jump out of my skin, but.
Hear no evil, see no evil.
But I
Okay.
don't know if they're having them actually eat and
Yeah.
drink in there.
Yeah.
But they definitely have always had the opportunity to go in there during lunch, and,
Okay.
and for some of them, that's a respite
Yeah.
and a happy place during
Right.
their lunch period.
Right.
I completely agree. I would love to see this utilized as much as we can. When it used to be called the library, it was not a popular spot for our middle schoolers and our high schoolers. It just historically, nationwide. But as we create these spaces to be much more inviting, I would love to see us get as creative as we possibly can to make these spaces as open and welcoming for our students as we can. Let me see here. The kitchens. Now that the breakfast and Katie, or I'm sorry, Katie. Amy, you touched on this.
I just took over in a name.
It's going to take a minute. You touched on this with the breakfast and lunches now being something that is offered throughout the state of Michigan. And that where we're designing right now, we're designing for that. Do we need to go backward in any of that to the degree that we can? Or were we already designing for that because we knew this is coming?
Yeah, I think like with our discussions with Pat, we kind of knew it was coming. So we've designed to the fullest extent that we could in these spaces. Obviously, we've got limitations.
Right.
But like the walk-in coolers, if we put in a walk-in cooler outside, especially like say Kennedy, we made it oversized so it could fully serve all the students in the building.
Okay. Okay, and that's including the work that was already being
Yeah.
done this year because we knew
Correct.
last year that this is potentially coming.
Exactly.
Okay.
And just to expand on that a little bit, there were lessons learned along the way that we actually rewalked Stevenson's Kitchen 2 weeks ago. the existing hoods there and equipment is oversized. It created mechanical challenges. So the team decided, well, let's replace the hood to make it more energy efficient and not create challenges with inspections and everything else. So we designed it to what we think is our max capacity with this program. We also added what we call an N+1. If we have X many ovens we think you can fit today, let's not just make that hood for today. What if something else happens we can't forecast? So we put an extra bay in there. We're not buying the equipment now, but the infrastructure is there. If something ever happens, we got to add a little bit more capacity. The infrastructure is there, buy the equipment, and we're fine.
Okay,
So that's the mentality. That's been the mentality for the whole program.
okay.
You
Great,
might,
thank
just
you.
because it's a tie-in, Ms. Schuhart had sent me an email that stated the difference between September of 2022 and September 2023. So just since we're on the topic of meals and the kitchens, I can give you the information that she shared with me. September of 2022, let me see, we are doing 46,200 more lunches
Oh my gosh.
than served last year.
In one
And-
month.
in just that month. And
In one
6,350 more breakfasts than served in September last year.
What was the breakfast number again?
Breakfast was 6,350. And remember, breakfast has always been pretty light. So over 6,000 is a pretty big number. But the lunches is 46,200 more. That's not how many they're doing. It's that many more than September of 2022. So we can see that there's.
In a month.
In that month. So we can see that there's quite a bit of participation. And I know that she's also noted to me that a lot of kids bring a lunch, but they also still do eat with the meal is in the cafeteria. So they're running through quite a bit of meals. Essentially, during COVID, when we had trouble getting the products, she hasn't talked about issue with product. It's really just more about time. When you have that many
Yeah.
folks going through a line that didn't go through before, it's slower. It's a little harder to get through. It's a lot of work. Those staffs are working very, very diligently and working very hard in those kitchens. I know that for a fact. And now we're in mid-October, so this is what it's going to look like as we move forward.
And it will be interesting to see if our numbers stay like this or if they go up or down. I mean, this is the first real
Right.
6 weeks of the program, so it'll be interesting to see by December, what is a plateau look like? You know, is this our plateau or is it changing at all? And now we're reimbursed from the state for the meal costs, correct?
We get reimbursed federally still if a student is eligible for
Right.
free or reduced lunch. We have sent out messages and we want to repeatedly ask families that if you think you're even close to being eligible for a reduced or free meal for your child, please fill that out, because it does help support the district or the state budget, because then that would come from the federal budget. But B, there's other items that helps the family. There's other discounts that occur both in LPS, but also just out in the community if your family, your child is eligible for that. So again, please fill those applications out for free reduced lunch. But to your point, if a student is eligible for free or reduced, that comes from federal. We can do that reimbursable as we've always done. Otherwise, it comes from the state budget.
Okay, but what doesn't come from either budget is increased staffing costs.
Correct.
And the problem of finding staff to hire for those positions, which is even more
That's the
difficult than
biggest
paying for
challenge.
the staff.
That's easily the biggest challenge. These are generally part-time positions. These are generally folks who are just looking for something to do. Now, we've got people that have been doing it for 20, 25, 30 years. It has been their career and they love what they do. But this isn't something that, it is difficult to get. We
Right.
always have the posting out there. We're hiring at any time throughout the year in our food service department, because people come and people go. We have a couple, I believe some recently folks we're putting into to retire soon, not the end of the year, mid-year, so we'll be having openings. If you're out there listening, livoniapublicschools.org, go to the careers page, you can apply online. It is something that we're always looking for.
Mrs. Opus?
So I just want to mention a couple of things to add on to what Mr. Francis has mentioned to us. It has been a significant weight on our food service department and our food service staff. So while we are certainly pleased to be able to provide meals to any student who needs that support and to families, we do have, if you hear that number, just in a month, 46,000 additional lunches. In very few places have we been able to add staff, not because we're not willing to and not because we don't want to, but we simply don't have the staff. And as Mr. Francis said, we have staff who have served us for decades. And they have just worked tirelessly over the years, but are finding this to be a significant lift this year. So we do encourage people to be patient. The lines are longer. There are more students coming through. Again, we're pleased to be able to feed any student that comes through the line. But if parents are wondering, boy, I am sending a meal with my child, I wonder if they're also picking up a meal, they can go on to the My Payments Plus. And even if you have not put money on that account, you can still check and see what your child is accessing each day. So some families may be curious and want to know that. And so that information is available to them. You may not even realize that your child is picking up a meal. And so if you'd like to know that and just have that information, that's available to parents. So we'll pop that information into the link, the LPS link this week as well, so that they can have that. But we do certainly want to communicate the impact that this has had on our food service department. And again, while we're thrilled to be able to provide this for our families and for our students, it certainly comes with just a heavy load on our folks who work in those departments. So we appreciate everyone's patience as we work to feed a lot of kiddos this year.
And then along that line also, and this may be, we've kind of digressed off of the agenda item, so if we want to talk about this at another time, that's fine. But have we offered our staff that we have additional hours? I mean, if they want or need to add 1 or 2 hours at the beginning or the end of what their shift was supposed to be, and obviously compensate appropriately, because you can't just serve up an additional 46,000 meals out of thin air. That time has got to come from somewhere. But if you want to address that at another time, that's fine also.
Yeah, I mean, we have, it really is the preparation does get done and I think we may have expanded 15 to 30 minutes is really all, you don't need hours and hours additional, because the real crux of it is during that time when the students are coming through, that becomes sort of the chaotic time. The preparation though is difficult. We have obviously contract language that we have to follow with regard to expansion of times to the hours of any particular position. We would adhere to those. We do have a letter of agreement with the AFSCME organization, knowing that this was coming, and we have some flexibility there because they understood and they do understand that, you know, sometimes it's going to be a little bit longer day, and so we can have that little bit of flexibility without having to, you know, repost different positions, etc. So we have looked at that, and yeah, honestly, we want to support in any way we can. I know that our folks are hardworking, they're diligent, they're trying to get things done, and it really, I think it's just it's a load within the same timing that they're normally working. It's just more volume, and if the students come through, it can be confusing because we want or we need to have each individual. When it was COVID, you could just count heads. Now we need to know that that head is Karen Bradford and that head is Mark Johnson and that head, you know, et cetera, which also makes it more difficult and slows down the line, takes time. So it's just it's a little different ballgame, and we're going to continue to try to get used to the rules of playing this ballgame versus the last time we did this, which is a little simpler last time.
And I know part of the problem is hiring people for that part-time position, and there may be some folks who actually would be happy to have a few more hours added onto their day. That may not be their wish, but if it is desirous of them, and if that is what's necessary to get that work done, I'd like to see that something that's addressed. You guys can get back with us on that, because again, that's kind
Thank you,
of
we
work
will.
going on to another topic, I know, so.
Sure.
Any other questions on this portion of this item on the agenda?
I did want to mention that we are renovating the 3 pools at the high school, so Franklin, Churchill, and Stevenson. So basically, we're upgrading the equipment that has seen its life, so like diving boards, any hand railing, the starting blocks, Harry's handling the scoreboard, but we'll do the timing system. The scoreboards have reached their life. I think Stevenson has to be replaced pretty soon here. But we're making sure that everything's coordinated so everything can plug into that new scoreboard. And then at Churchill, we're hoping to get an alternate for a new tile on the deck. So that's a big cost. So that's an alternate cost in there to see if we can get that in the budget, as well as wall tile. And then Churchill and Franklin, they asked for some exterior light. So we're looking at putting an alternate in for glass block windows to let some daylight in to those spaces. So those are planned to go forward with the 2024 work.
And speaking of light in those pool rooms, you've already retrofitted LEDs into those spaces, so it's already brighter and looking a little bit better, just from the light alone. It's amazing the difference that it makes when you do them.
Alrighty. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, that concludes Building and Site.
Thank you all, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Amy.
That'll take us now to item 4, our Finance Committee, and I'll turn it over to Mrs. Bonnefield.
Thank you, President Johnson. Our first item is 4A, and that is the wrestling mats for Stephen High School. Mr. Etu.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, I'm bringing to the board a recommendation for purchasing wrestling mats for Stevenson High School. In your board packet, you have 3 quotes from Dahlinger, Easy Flex, and Resolite. Dahlinger came in as the low bid. It's also a company that we've been working with Churchill High School and Franklin High School. So in the past year and a half, Churchill High School first up in the summer of '22, we purchased wrestling mats for them. They've been using them this year, or last year even. And then we just most recently purchased mats for Franklin High School, which are arriving in 4 to 6 weeks. So next up on the list is Stevenson High School. They're at end of life, and we're looking for a purchase of $29,255 through Dahlinger. And this is for the wrestling mats. It also includes, you can see on the quote with Dahlinger, the SHS logo will be on the mats, as well as the practice circles, and then they will be using their Flexi Connect for the mat connections as opposed to tape, which in the long run will be a savings of anywhere from $800 to $1,500 per year because they won't be using the tape anymore. So it's a cost up front, but a savings in the long run. So Stevenson certainly is excited for this recommendation to bring forward to you. Are there any questions regarding this recommendation?
President Johnson.
Thank you, Mrs. Bonnefield. Mr. Etu, do I understand that they also come with that cart to carry the mats?
Thank you for bringing that up, and I think I misspoke last time. It was my understanding that it did come with the carts, but the wrestling mats stay in the wrestling room. They're not moved, so the carts are an extra purchase and not part of this quote here.
Okay, and it sounds like since they're going to stay, we won't need to move them anyway.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So I apologize for misspeaking last time. It was my
Okay.
understanding. I saw a picture of a cart on one of the quotes, and my
Yeah,
assumption was
that's what I saw.
Exactly. And so I talked to Mr. Muscat, the athletic director at Stevenson, after you brought up that question last week, and he said, no, they stay within the wrestling room, and there's no need for the carts for those.
Perfect, thank you.
Madeline.
I know, I'm gonna have a follow-up question
Sure.
to that. So I guess the wrestling room is where the wrestlers actually practice.
Practice.
But are these mats gonna be separate from mats that are used for competition?
Correct. They have competition mats that are separate from the wrestling mats we're asking to purchase this evening.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
President Johnson, anything else on that?
No, thank you,
You're
Mrs. Bonnefield,
good?
I'm good.
Crystal, do you have anything? Okay. Okay. We will see this on the agenda
Very
next
easily.
week.
Please. Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Etu.
Okay, and our next item for finance this afternoon is financial update with Mrs. Smith.
Thank you very much. I've got some friends that'll be joining us from Plant Moran. We've got Tom and Allison that are going to help us walk through some of the highlights of the financial statements. I passed out before the meeting started a copy of the excerpts that we'll go over tonight. Before we jump into that, I'll give you the 60-second highlight of what we went over last week at the study session, and that was a review, big picture of our general fund budget and how it did compared to what we had budgeted for last year. So as a reminder, we came in favorably on the revenue side for the general fund to the tune of about $500,000. That sounds like a lot, but the budget variance was only 0.3%, so right in line with where we thought we would be. On the expenditure side, the expenditures came in favorably by $600,000. And again, that sounds like a lot, but when you look at our $177 million budget, that's only a variance of 0.4%. So again, expenditures coming in very closely to what we anticipated for last year. So we ended the school year with $31.5 million as a fund balance, and that's 17.8%. And as we've started doing over the last several years, we have projected or estimated, planned for things coming in more favorably than what we budget for. So we had already accounted for those, for $1 million of favorable activity. And so we will only be adjusting the beginning fund balance for the 23-24 school year by $100,000. So again, starting the year off right where we thought we would be. So that is in a nutshell. I know we spent a lot more time going over line item details of that during the study session, but again, for the board and maybe community members that weren't there last week, wanted to give that big, broad highlight. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom and Allison, and they're going to walk us through, again, some highlights from our financial statements and from the audit process.
Thank you, Allison. Good evening, everyone. It's been
Good evening.
it's very nice to see you all again, and appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm joined by Allison Glinka. She's our senior on the engagement. This is her first year on Livonia. She informed me while we were doing the construction project update that she lives very close to Hayes Elementary. So, so I'm a principal with Plant Moran. We're engaged to do the basic financial statement and single audit of the federal awards. And we're here to provide opinions on the basic financial statements and the federal awards audit. The work encompasses several weeks of field work. We're out here in May or June, and then we're typically doing year-end work in the September-October timeframe. So during that time, when we're on site, we test transactions. A lot of it for the transaction testing surrounds compliance. This year we tested 4 different major programs. ECF, the Emergency Connectivity Fund, ESSERS, Child Nutrition, and there's one additional, I believe it's the Special Ed Idea Grant. So those 4 grants typically will only have about 2 each year. This year there's just 4 based on how the federal government highlighted certain grants as higher risk, so ESSER. And then the Emergency Connectivity Fund was a new Type A program this year that we're required to test because it exceeded a certain threshold. So with that, we do test of existence on the assets. We make sure liabilities are complete across the school district, and we gather evidence to support the balances and activity reported within the financial statements themselves. The first 3 pages of our packet here indicate that the school received an unmodified, we're expecting to issue an unmodified opinion on the financial statements. It's an extremely high bar to meet. As I mentioned, it's a culmination of several weeks of field work and testing, and it's the highest form of assurance we can provide as the independent audit firm for the district. So I will cover some financial statement highlights. I'll kick it to Allison to cover some single audit materials and the end of audit letter at the back end of the packet, and then offer a lot. If you all are interested in any questions, or if you have any questions over the course of the presentation, feel free to interject, or we'll respond to the questions at the end. Okay. So page 4, the first 3 pages were the opinion that we had just covered. So we issued an unmodified opinion on the financial statements. So page 4, we're just going to highlight a few key pages and items within the financial statements themselves. So page 4, this is the statement of revenue, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. Across the top, you see the 4 major funds listed out separately: the general fund, special education fund, 2021 Series 1 fund, bond fund, and Series 2 bond fund, along with the non-major fund, and then the total at the far right side. So your total assets at the district were $262 million. This is a 13% increase from prior year. Those are largely represented by, assets, total revenue is $262 million. That $262 million is represented largely by the state aid and property taxes, along with certain federal source revenue. The general fund has $203 million of revenue at year end, June 30, 2023, and that's a 13.3% increase from prior year. Going down a little bit lower on the far left side, you'll see total expenditures in the general fund were $205 million. So that's a 13.6% uptick from fiscal year 22. A couple of the items in the expenditure lines and the other financing and sources lines that I'd like to point out: within the 2021 Bond Series 1 fund, you'll see $55 million of capital outlay. That's just the construction projects related to the bonds being spent down. The 2021 Bond Series 2 fund, you'll see in the other financing sources and uses section, there was $62 million of debt issued for that fund. That's the most recent series that was issued for the school district in the 2023 fiscal year. So going back into the general fund, you'll see the net change in fund balance, as Allison had mentioned. This is $1.3 million, which represents a 4% decrease of fund balance from June 30 of 2022. And the statewide average as of fiscal year, so one of the key metrics that the state uses to measure fund balance and the financial health of a district is fund balance as a percent of expenditures. So this general fund represents the general fund standalone plus the funded projects, which the districts will have a separate budget passed for. And we'll go into more detail on the budgets on the subsequent pages, but the way the state measures the financial health, they measure it fund balance as a percent of expenditures. So you see at the end of the year, the district has $31.5 million on the bottom left, and as a percent of the $205 million expenditures, that's about 15.3% of fund balance percent. The statewide average as of fiscal year end 2022 is about 20%, and the MSBO guidance will like to see about a 15 to 20% range for fund balance. So you can see that the district is within that window.
Can I interject there for a minute? Because I know that's a little different than what we look at typically. And as Tom said, we keep our grants in a separate fund, the Funded Projects Fund, and that's because it helps us track our grants and make sure we've got an accountant that oversees those. So when we're looking at our budget amendments, we are looking at the general fund just as what we call the general fund. But when we're looking at the financial statements, in the eyes of the state, the funded projects, the grants are part of our general fund. So that's where, again, our budget's about $177 million worth of general funds, but then what brings it up to the 202 would be adding in our grants there. So the percentage, because it's a larger denominator, is a smaller percentage, but we are looking at the same numbers. We've got
Yes,
the same books.
yes.
We've all of that. So I just wanted to reassure you of that. And also speak to, as we've had lots of discussions, this was a planned use of fund balance. So anybody tuning in from home that thinks, is the district in trouble because they're spending more than what they're bringing in, this was a planned use of our fund balance. Because we look to those guidelines like the Michigan school business officials that say a 15 to 20% fund balance is healthy. And we, between the administration and the school board, have said we want to use the funds that are in our control on the kids in front of us today. Not to the detriment of future kids. We don't want to spend it down to zero, but if we have money available to spend on the kids in front of us, we're going to do that, and we're going to do so responsibly. So we've had the opportunity to do some one-time projects. You'll recall the most recent one was improvement to some of our athletic programs, some of those one-time things like the weight rooms that need to be renovated that hadn't been touched in over 20 years, that weren't carved out as part of our sinking fund or bond projects, but things that we could do because we were in the financial position that we are. So this was a planned fund use, just as I know the board knows, and just wanted to again explain that difference between what we see here on the financial statements and what we see in our budget books.
Thank you for the clarification. I think it's good clarification for the community. And I guess the only other item I'd add is just the importance of fund balance. So the board, as good stewards of the district's resources, the fund balance and measuring how much to use, having those funds set aside, and it allows the district with flexibility amid uncertainty. So there's much uncertainty in the political landscape going forward, in the hard or soft landing that is projected to come within the economic landscape. The fund balance is also looked at by bond rating agencies to make, if the school district has poor financial health, the borrowing cost for the district will be higher. You can see some positive results lately in this past fiscal year where the district received an increase in their bond rating, and that saved the community a significant sum for reduced borrowing costs in the form of interest and where they're financing their debt at. So fund balance is a key benchmark to have, and that's why this fund balance as a percent of expenditures is something that is monitored by the state.
Interject one more thing, because I don't think that we'll cover this on the next page. Under that non-major funds includes our food service fund, and we were just talking about food service and the increased number of meals that we're serving, and is that covering staff costs? And I do want to reassure the board that it is a self-sustaining fund. So what we are paying for staffing for the food service program is supported by the reimbursements that we get for meals, now primarily from the state and the federal government, but it is self-sustaining, and it even allows us to do an indirect cost transfer to the general fund for I think this past year it was either $150,000 or $200,000 to recognize that in our general fund we're incurring indirect costs of running the food service program. Those go to cover things like HR at the time that HR is spending with hiring new staff. It also covers some of the costs in the business office, for instance, of monitoring the food service program. So it is self-sustaining, and under this new model this year we are planning and plan that it will continue to be self-sustaining. And that would be a conversation with the board if we ever got in a position where we weren't. I can speak to, even just this past year, we had such a healthy fund balance in the food service fund, we were able to augment some of our bond budget in the kitchen, buying food service equipment out of our food service fund because we had that healthy fund balance. So only that was my last thing.
So we've hit on all the items on page 4, and the next page 5 provides you a budgetary comparison schedule for the general fund. So this activity excludes the funded projects, which will be covered on the next page. But the board is legally required to approve budgets as part of the state law. And on the far left, you have the original budget, which is typically passed by the district in June of 2022. You have the final budget that's approved by the district in late 2023 in the fiscal year. And then you have the actual. And then on the far right, you can see the variance column. So in the original to final budget for revenues increased from $159 million to $172 million. That's primarily an element of a one-time contribution that the state announced for the MIPSers retirement system. It came in at about $10 million. You can see that the total expenditures increased fairly consistently with the revenue increase. And then to Allison's comment earlier, under both the original and final budgets for the general fund, you can see a planned use of $3 million in the original and $3.4 million in the final budget.
Tom?
Yes.
Can I ask, okay, the one-time MIPSers revenue that came in, that's, if I'm remembering correctly, that's revenue that comes in that we have to turn around and immediately write the check right back to the state.
That's correct, Ms. Burton.
Okay, which is why we're going to see the revenue and the expenditure being almost identically the same.
That's correct.
Okay, so this is basically a way for the state to bolster the retirement system for education retirees. But it doesn't have to, but it does. go through the school district, so it's counted as education dollars,
Yes.
roughly.
Yes. So
Okay.
it flows through the district. It's a revenue on the district's books. It's an expenditures on the district's books. But the district really has no discretion in how they're going to apply those funds because it's strictly going to be used as a one-time contribution to the retirement system.
Right, so we get it from the state, we have to turn around and send it right back to the state, and it goes into a different pocket of theirs, but that's what's going on here. Okay, thank you.
So on the far right, Allison touched on it during her initial comments. We have the budgetary precision measures. So you can see on the far right for expenditures, the district's actual expenditures in the general fund were about $176 million. The favorable variance of about $670,000 represents less than 1%. And, typically for sound budgeting, we'll look for anywhere from 1% to 3%. So the district is well below that lower end of the range. So definitely demonstrates a high quality of budgeting and planning within the business office. And then further down in the net change in fund balance, the planned use was about 3.4 million. The actual was 2.1, so that's a favorable variance of about $1.2 million. And as Allison alluded to, that's due to favorable spending and more than expected revenues to the tune of $550,000.
I think we say this every time, but again, we can't spend a penny more than what the board has authorized us to do. So somebody might wonder, why can't it even be closer? The board is approving a budget in June. It's because we still have time between the time that the budget is approved by the board and activity for the year. So it's in pockets that you'd expect to see, for instance, operations and maintenance, in case there's something that breaks that we need to fix immediately. Can't wait till July 1st to do it. We need to have some money budgeted for those type of emergencies. Things like general administration, if we need to call our attorneys, we need some money set aside to be able to engage them if we need to do that. So it's in pockets where we need it. But again, if it's not spent, then it's money that comes back into our general fund.
The next page 6 provides the budgetary comparison schedule for the funded projects portion of the general fund. So as Allison had mentioned, the funded projects are doing the accounting for restricted grants that are received by the district and only eligible to be spent on certain allowable expenses. So typically this fund will operate at a break even, which is why you can see at the bottom, the fund balance at the end of the year is 0. In some instances, there's minor timing differences for fund level accounting, just based on what's available versus what's unavailable, but that will ultimately balance out to 0 over the course of time.
You might recall that too. You'll see on the page the $877,000. That had to do with the ESSER grant that we got reimbursement for some expenditures for the prior year after it has to be received within 60 days of the year end, and it was received like 63 days after year end, so we couldn't recognize that revenue, so we had that $877,000 balance, but then we got payment for it this year, so now our fund balance again is to 0 like you'd expect.
So you can see the original and final budgets, the revenue increased about $7 million from the original to final. That's related to increased state and federal grants. I wanted to point out that the actual revenue in the funded projects of $30.5 million represents an increase of 36% from fiscal year '22. And you can see that there is a variance on the far right within revenue of about $9.5 million. So the final budget had about $40 million of expected revenue versus $30.5. And this relates to unspent ESSER funding and reduced emergency connectivity funding. Total expenditures, again, consistently increased with the revenues in the original and final budget, and you can see at year end, it was a break even, 0 fund balance. Page 7 provides the balance sheet for the governmental funds. You can see again that the major funds are listed out across the top. This fund level balance sheet focuses on the current economic resources. So on the far right, you can see total assets were $197 million. This is largely represented by restricted assets. Those relate to debt and bond proceeds that are legally restricted for specific purposes. And then you can see towards the top, cash equivalents and cash and investments are about $43 million. I did want to point out that the investments in the general fund have increased a bit from prior year, and the district was able to recognize $760,000 of investment income within the general fund, which illustrates, again, the stewardship at the district and getting the most return on their investable assets. The other large asset is you're going to be your state aid for July and August. So there was about $30 million due from other governments. Total liabilities are about $69 million, and that's largely represented by your summer pays for teachers, your 10-month employees. And within your fund balance section, you'll see that a large portion of it is restricted to debt service and capital projects. The capital projects of about $86 million will decrease over time as your construction projects are completed with the capital outlay. At the bottom left, you can see your total fund balance for the general fund is $31.5 million. This next page is page 8, the statement of net position. This is your full accrual basis and balance sheet, which features the long-term assets and obligations of the district. So a couple of differences on this compared to the fund level balance sheet. You'll see that the capital assets are listed on here. Those are $332 million for the district. You'll see that the non-current liabilities amounts due with or are represented largely by your bonds payable, which are $310 million as of year end. And then a significant portion of MIPSR's obligations, net pension liabilities and OPEB liabilities represent $426 million of the district's total $794 million of liabilities. The final item to point out on the statement of net position, again, this full accrual balance sheet, would be the net position. At the bottom, you'll see the unrestricted is a negative amount. That's a deficit net position of $328 million of unrestricted net position. Most districts across Michigan will have this deficit position because of their participation in the MIPSR's retirement system. So it's something that districts have to deal with, and it's because of their proportionate share of that unfunded liability. And there's really nothing the district can do to change that liability. You're at the mercy of the retirement system to ultimately fund it, which is why the state's making those certain contributions over time to hopefully right the ship on that within the pension system and OPEB liabilities.
Yes. I know there was a projection that liability was supposed to be funded by 2038, something like that. Has that changed at all?
So the actuaries within the ORS, the MIPSR's reports, they'll use assumptions, and it'll be anywhere from a 15 to 17-year period within the report itself. The swings in this liability just are, there's been no change in when they expect to pay it down. However, you'll see that this year the liabilities are larger than they were last year to a sizable degree because of the swing in investment income and the market conditions from 21 to 22. So that wraps up my remarks on the basic financial statements. I'll turn it over to Allison Glinka to cover the single audit results and the end of audit letter.
Yep, thank you. So the next page, page 9, gives a summary of our basic and single audit results. So note the unmodified opinion on the financial statements and each of the major programs tested for fiscal year 2023. Following our testing in the basic and single audit compliance requirements, we are pleased to report that there are no reportable items or findings this year. As Tom mentioned earlier, the child nutrition cluster, the special education cluster of grants, the COVID-19 ESSER or Education Stabilization Fund, and the COVID-19 Emergency Connectivity Fund programs were tested. So 4 major programs total this year, each receiving an unmodified opinion relative to our compliance work. And then also to point out on this page, the district once again was designated as a low-risk auditee based on clean audit results in the previous 2 fiscal years. Yes.
Thank you. How do you choose the programs or the clusters? Is there something, how do you go about finding what you're going to test?
So any type A program, how it's referred to, is a federal program that's greater than, that the district spends more than $750,000.
Okay.
So those programs are required to be tested within the past 2 fiscal years. So if we haven't tested in the prior fiscal year, it's due up in rotation and we'll have to test it. The other side of it is if we assess it as higher risk or if the federal government assesses it as higher risk, which is what we saw for the COVID-19 ESSER funds.
Okay.
For the,
So in the next years, because we don't have ESSER's funds, you'll be choosing something else to test, correct?
yes, and we're required to get a certain amount of coverage as well. As a low-risk auditee, we're required to get 20% coverage on your federal awards. If it was high risk, we would have to get 40% coverage. So again, the quality in the business office really saves time from audit work that needs to be done with that low-risk
Thank you.
auditee status.
And then just kind of tagging along with that, you said that 750,000 is the threshold. Because we're a large district and our income and our expenses are both going to be higher than that of a small district, would small districts not necessarily have those funds targeted, that they would have, or, you know, investigated, they would have others? Because it seems like 750 is going to be very different in the eyes of a tiny district versus a large like ours.
Yes, so at the smaller districts that exceed the $750,000 single audit requirement, so here at Livonia, I believe you have about $22 million in federal expenditures. Some of these smaller academies throughout Michigan and smaller school districts, they'll only have $1 million in federal awards, and those are only those will be represented by less than type A programs, so we call them type Bs. And we'll have to assess risk on those, which ones have had internal controls that might be of issue to us or just items that we identify. And then as auditors, we'll make a selection on which programs we deem necessary to test in the current year. And they may not be type A, but we'll need to test some level of programming in order to get the 20% coverage.
Okay. So those, basically those that have a dollar figure associated with them, a district our size is almost always going to exceed that dollar figure, so we're going to be having those specific categories looked at.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Next 3 pages represent the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. So what this schedule is, it itemizes out spending by federal program for the district. So across the top, it includes the grant names, the total approved award amount, federal revenue received during the year, and then federal expenditures. So the district's most significant federal programs are the child nutrition, special education, Title I, COVID-19 ESSER or the Education Stabilization Fund, and then the COVID-19 Emergency Connectivity Award. So looking at page 12, total federal expenditures on the CFA this year were $21 million for the year ended June 30th, 23. Note that the ESSER or the Education Stabilization Fund program represents about $10.3 million or 50% of the federal revenue and expenditure this year. So this non-recurring funding is rooted from pandemic relief, and the final phase of this program is going to expire in September of 2024. So over the course of the Education Stabilization Fund programs, the district's been awarded approximately $30 million and has expended thus far $23.6 million, leaving approximately $6 million left to be spent of the ESSER funds.
While we're on that page, just in, maybe going over that emergency connectivity fund for you. That one is on page, I think it's the last page, page 12. One thing that's come up from the draft to the finalized version that we were just discussing earlier today, the emergency connectivity fund is the one that we got for giving devices to students at home to learn with. And we had to come up with an estimate of devices, kind of, I'll say, without a ton of, research. So Mr. Klan, our IT director, used an estimate based on what we passed out at the start of the pandemic of families that indicated a need for a device, and we handed out about 8,000 devices. So in our grant application, we requested payment for 8,000 devices, and they sent us payment for 8,000 devices, which comes out to about $3.2 million. And as we've had discussions with the board many times, when it came time to pass out the devices, we didn't have 8,000 families or students requesting the devices. We had handed out about half of them. So at the end of the day, we couldn't keep the grant funding for those 8,000 devices because they weren't distributed out to families. But the silver lining is we needed to replace some of the Chromebooks in our classrooms, so it worked out perfectly that we could, the computers that weren't handed out, we repurposed to use in the room. We reached out to the awarding agency and we made payment back to them before June 30th for the grant funds that were received that weren't related to devices that were handed out to kids. So in the final draft of the financial statements, you'll see an amount under the adjustments and transfers column, and that's a transfer back to the awarding agency. So, and I believe there's also a note on the statement, but that'll be different. You'll see that in your board packet. So wanted to give you a heads up about that.
The next page, the final deliverable we're going to cover is the end of audit letter. And this summarizes the responsibilities and results of the audit. So our responsibility as auditors under U.S. generally accepted auditing standards is to express an opinion about whether the financial statements of the district are fairly presented in all material respects in conformity with U.S. generally accepted accounting principles. So our responsibility is to plan and perform the audit to obtain reasonable but not absolute assurance that the financial statements are free from material misstatements. Our audit is also conducted in accordance with government auditing standards. This year, the district adopted a new accounting standard, GASB 96, which is subscription-based IT arrangements. The adoption of this standard is not going to have a significant impact on this year's financial statements. And as we touched on earlier, the most sensitive estimate affecting the financial statements is the school district's share of the MIPSR's net liabilities. So the school district's estimate as of June 30th, 2023 totals roughly $426 million for these liabilities. We are happy to report that we encountered no difficulties or disagreements with management over the course of our audit, and we also did not detect any misstatements as a result of our audit procedures. I'll turn it back over to Tom.
Thanks, Allison. So overall, it was a successful audit. These are good results. And it's a big thank you to Allison and her team in the business office. Much responsiveness, very timely in providing us with the requests and fulfilling any questions or requests that we had related to the audit. So, just again, want to say thank you for the opportunity to serve and your time this evening. So we're on track to meet the November 1st deadline, and happy to answer any additional questions that the committee may have.
Anything, guys?
Just thank you for all the work you did. I know I had a conversation early on. It was, enjoyable. I appreciated it, and glad we're unmodified.
Mrs. Oquist.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Bonnefield. So certainly we want to thank our colleagues at Plant Moran for their thorough work, the time they spent out here on site as well as back at the office, and the thorough way you've reviewed the report this evening. We look forward to the formal presentation next week at our board meeting, where the board will have a chance to accept and vote on that. I also really want to, as we talked about in our study session, acknowledge the work of our CFO, Allison Smith, as well as her team. This is, someone listening may think it's a mundane report that we've just heard. What we've heard is the oversight and stewardship of the dollars entrusted to us in Livonia Public Schools has been exceptional. To continue to have unmodified opinions in our audit, no findings, and be able to report back to the board with less than a 0.5% difference and differential between the estimated and projected budget and the final actual is really, truly exceptional when you're talking about $160 million. So I just want to acknowledge the tremendous work that Allison does, not only on a day-to-day basis, but in the investment work, as Mr. Marchese mentioned, the investment of some of our general fund dollars, the return we've had on that, the ability for our district to move into a higher rating for the bond, saving our taxpayers, and just continuing to really be forward-thinking about our fiscal stewardship in Livonia Public Schools. So we are so proud of that. It has allowed us to, when we hear about a 13% increase in revenue, we saw a commensurate 13% increase in expenditures. And that tells us that we are spending these dollars on the students in front of us, on the resources for the staff who are serving them. And that is what we want to see in a school district. We want to see those dollars being put to good use for our school community, both the dollars entrusted to us by the state and federal governments, as well as by our community through the bond and the sinking fund and our operating millage. So to have these reports, although people may, who aren't financial folk, may tune out just a bit, I just want to underscore the importance of hearing a report like this in a district, in an organization our size, and commend Mrs. Smith and her team for this work.
Thank you, Alice.
Can I, Allison, ask a question? So I know that some of this we're required to give, the information we're required to give at a public meeting, and I don't want to downplay any of that. However, there are a couple of items that if we can maybe highlight though, right, back off on some of the stuff that's a little drab, if we've already met those qualifications, and maybe, especially since it's televised and we have a little bit of a bigger public audience, is I think we've hit the higher rating, but maybe bring that out and make sure that we let people know what that means. And I don't know if there's any financial statistics that we can attach to that, that are, because of the higher rating, in general, right, it's better for the community, we get lower, but if there's any financial numbers that we can put to that.
I know we've gotten those numbers from PFM, our financial advisors, just how much we're saving because of the higher ratings, so I'd be
And
happy
if we
to bring
can
that.
call that out. The investment income, I think, if we can call that out, maybe what those numbers are, and then comparatively, I don't know if we can compare that to other districts or other years, but to point out that we've really been fiscally responsible, and that, what the outcome has been of that investment income, if there's something that we can call out specifically again. And then the other thing that I thought was, when we talk about the audit and the unmodified opinions, I know that there was a lot of really complicated, we had to stay within certain guidelines. We could, for the ESSER's dollars, we could only spend it on certain amounts. We had timelines that we had to meet, and it was very complicated to make sure that we jumped through all the hoops on that. Is that correct?
Yes.
is that if we wanted to talk about, really highlight the stability and how our financial office operates, is to really maybe highlight that as an example of, right, some of this other stuff, you know, we get in the routine, we're doing stuff, and we have, you know, long-standing employees in there, and that sometimes you can hit those benchmarks just out of, you know, as long as you're following the procedures and you're doing the role. But I think the ESSER's funds were really kind of a monkey wrench thrown in, and there was a lot to work with. So I thought if we can, like I said, meet our obligations, but that those three things might be some things that we can really pull out and talk about that are maybe a little more interesting to the general public, and also kind of highlight what we do and how we do it, and give some kind of meat or teeth to those things that we talk about, rather than, you know, 6-7 digit numbers kind of, right, go over everybody's heads. They're just a little bit too big to absorb. And so if we can, I'd really love to see if we could highlight some of those, if it's applicable.
That sounds great.
Not that we think that any of the things you talk about are boring, just to
No.
be clear. It's fascinating to most of us,
Sure.
but yes.
No, understood.
I will take that a minute, if you'll allow me to, just to thank Plant Moran. What I appreciate, and I appreciate the board allowing us to continue the relationship with Plant Moran, the expertise they bring, the ongoing resources throughout the school year. It's not that I just see Tom and Allison at the end of the school year. It's, we've got something new coming out. The GASB, you know, 96 was the new one this year. Before that, it was GASB 87. And their firm is so large that they have resources, they have people that can be on these things and put tools together for school districts so that we can make sure that we're in compliance with what the new standards are. And I appreciate that. And I don't think that you get that at every auditing firm. I appreciate that anytime I've got a question during the year of, would it be appropriate to record this like this? You know, they're a phone call away and are so responsive. So thank you for the board for letting us continue the relationship, and thank you, Tom and Allison. We really do value Plant Moran and appreciate all that you do for us. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Anything else for finance? If there is nothing else, that concludes our finance portion of the evening.
Why, thank you. Thank you for
Thank you
being,
so
Tom.
much,
Allison,
guys.
thank you for being here.
Bye, Tom, bye, Allison.
Thank you.
Okay, then that will take us to item 5, our curriculum committee, and I'll turn it over to Mrs. Acosta.
Thank you, President Johnson. We have nothing to report at this time. This is a surprising, yes,
Yeah.
development.
Isn't this so right?
I know. We
She's
have stuff
hiding.
coming up in the future, giving you some time, so we have nothing to report this evening.
Very good, then we'll turn it over to item 6, policy committee, and Mrs. Frank.
Thank you, President Johnson. We do have one item. Mrs. Smith, you're going to take care of this for us?
I didn't go far. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
As I mentioned last week at our study session, normally about this time of year, we get a memo from the Michigan Department of Education letting us know what the competitive bid threshold is for the school year. And that closely aligns with our board policy DJE, and specifically the administrative procedures for board policy DJE, our purchasing procedures. In those procedures, we designate at the different levels what approvals are required. So under $2,000, a building principal or administrator is able to approve. Anything over $2,000 would then also go on to a director for approval. It speaks to purchases between $10,000 and currently $28,000 being rewarded after the receipt of written quotes. And again, that goes along with wanting to be good stewards of the resources that are entrusted to us. And if we're making a purchase over $10,000, that's significant, and we want to make sure that we're getting the best deal. So we ask anybody making those purchases to attach, to seek multiple quotes and then attach those to our purchase orders so we can make sure that those procedures are being met. The next threshold of purchase is something that would require coming to the board for approval and also require competitive bids or quotes be solicited. Currently, that amount is $28,000, and based on this MDE memo coming out, they've increased that by the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. So I'm proposing updating our administrative procedures to align that with the new amounts from MDE. So that would bring the total up to $29,500. So anything over $29,500 would need to have competitive bids, and also would need to come to the Board of Education for approval. So that's the main change to this administrative procedure. While I had it open, I updated a couple of the references to the Director of Finance to read now Chief Financial Officer. And I also updated a reference to the Purchasing Department. We've had some changes, and now the purchase orders are processed through the business office. So I updated the Purchasing Department to now refer to me, the Chief Financial Officer. So not a change in practice, but just updating a few references and updating that dollar amount, assuming that's okay with the board.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And again, this is an administrative procedure, not a policy.
Correct.
So it doesn't require board approval, but we appreciate the fact that you're bringing it to us just to let us know what is, what the level is. Are there any questions?
Would there be any purpose to just go over this very briefly at the meeting, just so people, for the general public to know that
Sure.
we
Yeah.
are,
Mhm.
what our policies are, and just, again, that we have a little backstop in there, and that
Yep. And this is great. I mean, as the auditors were saying with their testing, this is part of the things that they test. If we say that we're getting 3 quotes for something over 10,000, show me the 3 quotes you got for that $15,000 purchase. Okay, you purchased wrestling mats for 29,000. Show me the board approval of the wrestling mats, and that's
Right.
exactly what they test us for. So it's great for our community to know that these are the internal rules above and beyond what the state and the federal government set for us. We have local set of rules that we must follow and adhere to, and again, we're held accountable to. So be happy to.
I would suggest we put that under hearing from board members, because it wouldn't be a voting item
Yeah.
under finance.
No, but I was just,
Yeah.
if she just meant, and I would even be like, maybe under our accounting, as an example, here.
Of what the auditors are testing, maybe?
Testing,
Mhm.
or, we keep this up, here's something that we keep up to date, just as part of, rather than having it as a separate, including that in the.
As part of the
here's
financial
what our-
update.
Yeah, what our auditors
Sure.
do,
Okay.
where
Yep.
we update this every year,
Yep.
and here's,
Sure.
right, and include it in, again, it has some, well, it's a little more tangible things to talk about, how, precise we are, and how efficient we are, and that there are a lot of, regulations isn't the right one, but, hoops, you're right,
What are the
policies.
controls?
Mhm.
A lot-
Sure.
Yes, thank you. These are some of the controls that we
Absolutely.
use, and as examples of, stuff that goes into this,
Mhm.
what the auditors look for, and
Mhm.
make it a little more tangible.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, Mrs. Burton?
Just looking, Allison, at the difference in verbiage between item 3 and item 4.
Sure.
Basically, item 3 refers to quotes that are required, that 3 quotes are required. If an item is going to be purchased between $10,000 and $29,500. Then item 4 refers to them as competitive bids. Is there
That-
really a difference?
Not really, but I'll say this language in number 4 is pulled right from statute that refers to
Okay.
competitive bids, which is why we used that. Competitive bids can be putting a bid out on the state website and in newspapers and soliciting bids that way. That word to competitive bids was just updated last year. You recall that used to be called sealed bids. And we found that we were being even more restrictive than what the statute required us to be. And based on confirmation from our attorneys, we were able to update that to competitive bids. But in some instances, like I think the most recent example of the competitive bids, we ran into an issue of purchasing a vehicle that if you put out a bid for vehicles, we're gonna get laughed at. Like that's hard to do. But because we had updated our procedure to allow for competitive bids, we were able to go to several different dealerships and get competitive pricing for the similar model vehicle, and that qualified, or that satisfied this requirement. So same with the number 3, the amounts between 10,000 and 29,500. It really is
It's pretty much the
relatively the
same
same, yep.
Okay. And then therefore, the only significant difference is that between 10 and 29, or over 29,500 is going to require board approval.
Correct.
After we get those competitive bids.
Correct, yep.
Yeah, quotes, competitive bids.
Yep.
whichever we go. Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Allison, for 3, the
Yep.
10,000 to 29,000, who is approving those purchase orders? Or who is, it says $2,000 requires building approval. Anything over 2,000 is central office administrator. And then it doesn't say who does the, I'm just wondering for my own
So
knowledge.
all purchases go through a flow through the business office. I'll walk you through one, for example, say the athletic director wanted to purchase $11,000 of something. That would first get, normally it's generally their secretary putting it on, then the athletic director approves it, authorizing that, yes, I did request this item. It would then go to the director, it would go to Kevin E2 for approval. He's got familiarity with what's happening in the buildings, knowing what's appropriate. It then comes to our office, our accountant approves every purchase. If it's over $10,000, it goes to our finance manager, and if it's over the amount that needs to go to the board, it comes to me. So you've got 3 people in the business office checking it, making sure things align, that it's appropriate, the right account's being used. So 3,
Competitive bid.
Yep.
Gotten no quotes.
exactly. So,
Okay.
yeah, that is the
That's
process.
Great to know. It's a great process. You know, there are lots of checks and balances in there.
Yep.
So, perfect. Okay. Anything else? Nope, we'll put that on for just your financial update.
Sounds good, thank you.
And that concludes the policies. President Johnson?
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. We'll take this to item 7, Legislative Committee, and Mrs. Jarvis.
Thank you. We have no items to discuss.
We do not.
Thank you, Mrs. Jarvis. That'll take us to item 8, Personnel Committee, Mrs. Bradford.
Thank you, President Johnson. Tonight, we do not have anything for the Personnel Committee.
Nothing?
Nothing.
Very good. Well, that brings us to the end of our agenda. Thanks to all that participated tonight. Mr. Weber. Thank you. Thanks to those who were here tonight, Mr. Weber, Mr. Marchese, and Allison, her last name? The other Allison.
Leka.
Glika.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you to those folks, and since we are at the end of our agenda tonight, we are going to say good evening. Thank you.